Talented. Written by Debbie Civil. Narrated by Adam Gold and Lauren Rodriguez.
Chapter 1. Reginald. Raph, Kent, Marissa, and I sat at Marissa's kitchen table. I clutched a mason jar which held 4 straws, one of which had a slit at its end. I closed my eyes and pleaded with my maker that I didn't pull the straw with the slit. I didn't want to suffer through a night of babysitting a bunch of stuck-up idiots who would never understand the danger that they were in. Since Marissa was the one who had created the slit at the bottom of the straw, I was unable to fix the draw. Instead, I snatched a straw and placed the jar on the kitchen table by my best friend Raph's arm. In all honesty, I could have touched the other end of the straw to know my fate. But Marissa liked the suspense. I didn't have the heart to take that excitement from her, especially since I was the reason for the overwhelming despair that she once felt. Raph sucked in a breath and selected a straw, dramatically shaking the mason jar. The sound of the straws clinking together would not reach Marissa's mother, who was in her upstairs bedroom arguing with the television. But had I been in her position, that would have sounded like a gong. So when Raph shook the mason jar, I covered my ears while my other friends groaned in protest. "What the hell?" Kent hissed, thankfully in a harsh whisper.
"Can we get this over with? Touching awareness and echo is killing me,"
Marissa quietly complained. "You're the one who insisted that one of us should go to every party," I fought back, thinking that the girl had no right to whine about her circumstances.
"We can't let them win,"
Marissa argued. Them. That was the only name we had for our evil enemies. The boy, Key, who was the only one that had managed to contact knowledge, was murdered before he could tell us. So now, the 4 of us, all talented teenagers, fumbled around, trying to eliminate a nameless enemy that no one else could see.
"Okay, you can stop making contact with Echo now. Reginald didn't cheat this time,"
Marissa reported, stating the obvious. I rolled my eyes, even though she couldn't appreciate it. If any optometrist were to examine our eyes, they'd conclude that we were blind, and, for the most part, we were. I hoped that it remained that way. "Can we get this over with?" Kent asked, his boredom barely contained. "My mother is making cookies." Kent Renner had 4 motivations in life: eating, reading, graphic audio, and sleeping. The guy was a hermit, only being able to tolerate the company of his mother.
"All right, check your straws,"
Marissa said, anticipation filling her tone. I grasped the other end of my straw and cursed. "I have the straw," I announced, my irritation giving way to anger. Raph patted me on the back. "It's okay, man. I'll come with you." Raph always volunteered to patrol with anyone that had the unlucky draw. "Do we have to do this next week? Raph can just go," Kent pointed out. Before anyone could tell Kent to shut up and accept that he had to communicate with us, I detected a presence. I studied the patterns, touching the talent of awareness until a name filled my brain. Isaiah Lewis. I knew the guy that had just mounted the porch, because he was my brother. The mason jar shattered, most likely from Kent's doing. When he was angry, he accidentally connected with durability, which made him break things. That talent increased our body's physical strength and made us nearly impenetrable. Aside from durability, our group could connect with velocity, which increased speed, awareness, which gave us information about our surroundings, echo, which increased hearing, and depletion, which sapped the enemy of energy. Marissa cursed, and I detected her movements as she stood and retrieved the dustpan and broom from the mudroom. "What is he doing here?" Kent hissed. "I told my mother that I'd walk home," I responded in answer as I made contact with Echo so that my hearing could improve.
"Hi, Isaiah. How are you?"
Our only female friend asked, her voice holding what normal people would call awkwardness, but was obviously pain to us. Self-loathing began to fill me as the reason for why Marissa was feeling those emotions popped in my head. "Hey, Marissa, is Reggie ready?" he asked. Reggie. I hated being called Reggie because it was the last thing that Key had shouted right before they killed him. I was 2 seconds too late, and every time I thought about it, the facts nearly decimated my spirit.
"Oh, yes, Reginald is ready. Are you here to pick him up?"
My friend was worried about how I'd react at being stuck with Isaiah, but I had perfected the act. "Yes, my mother asked me to pick him up on my way home from the barbershop." "Well, I'll see you later, guys," I said, as I picked up the folding cane that was in my lap and unfolded it. As the pieces clicked together, the thought of the car ride nearly drained me. After wrapping my right hand around the grip, I began navigating into the mudroom. Before I could leave, Marissa gave me a tight hug, and I held her close, feeling glad that she was still alive. Her orange-scented shampoo reached my sensitive nose, and the comfort it brought made the pain in my chest go away for a moment. But then I released her, gently ruffling her hair before making my way out the door. Isaiah drove the BMW that my father won as a prize at some game show a couple of years ago. From what I remember during the last time my vision returned to me, it was black, sleek, and well taken care of. I didn't bother taking my brother's elbow so that he could give me sighted guide. I knew the area well enough, and my senses were still touching awareness, so I'd be able to avoid any surprises. Isaiah had parked in front of the house, and I quickly entered the car, shivering from the October breeze that we were cursed with. Isaiah got into the driver's side, and we began heading home. I had to roll down the window to avoid smelling the cigarette smoke. "Are you going to Craig Daniels' party?" Isaiah tentatively asked. Like usual, I didn't respond, because we both knew that I'd show up to the party, even if I was uninvited. Most of the kids welcomed me with open arms and hardly complained because I stayed out of their way. But Craig Daniels wasn't kind to anyone that showed up, let alone 4 blind dorks who he believed were mentally challenged. That was laughable, since 3 out of the 4 of us were in the top 5 of our class. Raph was number 7, but he was determined to remedy that by sabotaging people during tests by whispering incorrect answers. So far, his tactic had only earned him 2 detentions and a tongue lashing by a cranky math teacher. "Heads up, Mom is going to make you go to a shrink." "For what?" I snapped, my posture straightening. "For what? You don't talk to anyone, you don't play music, and you attend random parties that you aren't invited to," Isaiah listed, which made me tempted to contact durability and leap out of the car. But I stayed put, not wanting to overwhelm my senses. As a talented, we were born with 7 small reserves of power that our consciousness could touch. But how long we could consciously hold on to a specific talent depended on how much endurance we had. So far, we could only touch 5 out of the 7 talents without issues. The other reserves hadn't been unlocked to any of us. Before Key, who had 8 talents, died, he explained that as we aged, the talents would become easier to touch. "Look, Reggie, Craig Daniels and I are cool. He doesn't want you to come tonight." "What a chick," I said, unable to hold in my disgust. "Is he worried that people will think he's a loser because the blind guy's at his party?" "Nah, man. You being there apparently makes Yasmine uncomfortable. They had an argument about it today." "Good. I'm glad she's uncomfortable," I hissed, wishing that I could inflict the pain that Key felt when they gutted him. The reason that they had come at all was because of her. Well, it was because of me, because I decided to trust her. "Get over Yasmine and date Marissa," my brother suggested. "Marissa is like a sister to me," I responded in an aggravated tone. "Too bad. She's hot. Then you date her," I suggested, which shut my brother up. Thank goodness he felt the need to turn on some rap music, which I gently nodded my head to. My babies are home! My mother cheered as soon as we walked in through the front door. Craig Daniels' party started in less than 2 hours, which meant that I had to smooth things over with my mother so that she wouldn't check on me for the night. "Hi, Mom," I greeted as I gently caressed the kitchen island. She wrapped her arms around me, her head pressing into my chest. I patted her head affectionately. Thankfully, my vision had never returned in her presence, so I never got to see her. But once, my brother had the football team over our house for his 18th birthday, and I heard Craig say that my mother was a MILF. It took every bit of restraint that I had not to go down to the living room and unleash depletion on him. But then I recalled Key's first warning. Killing a human meant the weakening of our powers. Although Craig Daniels was annoying, he wasn't worth that. "It's nice to see you," I added, because I knew that it was the only way to extricate myself from her embrace. She released me with a sigh.
So, Reggie, your father was hoping that you could visit him this weekend.
"No thanks," was my automatic answer. It wasn't that I hated my father, but because of my duties to this town. Westgrove seemed to have an abnormal amount of their presence, so who knew when one of my comrades would find themselves in battle?
Why not?
My mom asked, her tone disappointed. They had ended amicably 2 years ago. The love just wasn't there, and Dad fell in love with Mom's friend, Lola.
Honey, I hope you know that I was the one that asked your father for the divorce. So, if you want to blame someone, it should be me.
Mom, maybe Dad could come here for a change. It doesn't seem fair that he was the one who decided to move 3 hours away from his kids, and we have to visit him, I argued. The words were a lie, and it was difficult to add heat to them. But I managed. This could just be my opening.
Reggie, Isaiah is driving up tomorrow. I'd like you to go with him, she said, sternness in her tone.
We can't be more than 20 miles apart, Reggie. I don't think that this camping trip is a good idea,
Key had warned when I broached the subject to him. I ignored his warnings and went camping with Yasmine and her family. It was on that stupid weekend that I had stumbled upon Craig Daniels and Yasmine in the woods, hungrily making out in the dead of night. I had been so humiliated that I ran all the way back to Westgrove. Sorry, Mom. I can't go, I gently told her, and she wrapped me in another hug.
I'm sending you there for Christmas break. I'll come too,
she announced, and I immediately stiffened and shot her a glare. Leave it alone! I'm not going! I shouted.
If you think you can take that tone with me, you have another thing coming. You're grounded,
Mom said in her no-nonsense tone. I stomped out of the kitchen and entered the hallway, passing Isaiah, who was munching on food. After running to my room, I shut and locked the door. I changed out of my button-down and jeans and exchanged them for a ratty sweatshirt and a worn pair of jeans. If it suddenly disappeared, my mom wouldn't miss them. I couldn't skimp on footwear, so I pulled out my running shoes. I had just laced them up when someone knocked on my door. I still held my contact with awareness, so I knew that it was Isaiah. What? I shouted. I'm leaving to go to Dad's house at 7:30, if you change your mind, was all he said before he walked away. Making contact with velocity and durability, I made my way over to the window and slid it open. After swinging my legs out of the opening, I leapt through, feeling fortunate that there weren't rose bushes on that side of the house. I landed on the grass and without a second thought, began zipping through the streets, my awareness preventing me from crashing into anything. By the time I made it to Raph's apartment complex, a steady downpour was saturating me with rain. Raph, who had to leave the old-fashioned way, was waiting for me in the lobby of his apartment building. Unlike the rest of us, Raph was from a working-class family. It was only him and his mom. His father had died in a car wreck 10 years ago. Hey, man, Raph greeted as we bumped fists. Hey, ready to go? I asked. Hell yeah. It was raining, so the sidewalks were blissfully empty. I was half tempted to extinguish contact with durability, but decided that luck was hardly ever on my side. The moment that I lost my hold on durability, I'd miscalculate and go splat against a telephone pole. As I ran, I locked on to Craig Daniels' energy and was surprised to note how distant it was. His location was 6 miles from Raph's, and it took us 6 minutes to run it. "Where do you think they are?" I asked Raph, who was panting beside me. Holding velocity, awareness, and durability for more than 5 minutes was difficult for most of the group. After Key died, I went through a phase where I forced myself to contact the talents that I could use for as long as I could. Even then, I could only hold velocity for about 8 minutes. Still, in a couple of seconds, I'd be as strained as my friend. "I don't know." A vicious cramp sliced through my stomach, and I abruptly stopped running and fell to the pavement. The fingers of pain dug into my abdomen with little mercy. Raph knelt beside me and felt my forehead. "Reginald, let go of one of them," my friend pleaded. But we both knew that losing contact with any of the 3 talents that I currently touched was a risk that we couldn't afford to take, no matter how much I was suffering. "Who cares about the party? We'll just go home and eat." My friend stopped speaking, and the weight of fear I felt nearly stopped my heart. Crap. My vision returned to me.
Chapter 2. Sophia. No response? Well, screw him. I didn't need his validation, because I knew I had to put together the right look. I wore a crop top that exposed just the right amount of my toned stomach, skinny jeans that squeezed my bubble butt, and not to mention the smoky eye that I had perfected. Yep, Tony Jerkins was going to be dumped. I just had to figure out when was the best time to do it. I honestly had no desire to go to Craig Daniels' party, mainly because he was a jerk. Netflix and a bag of microwave popcorn were calling my name. I glared down at the high-heeled ankle boots that I had paired with this ensemble, and was half tempted to go inside my house and change into flats. But Tony's glare told me he wasn't going to wait for me any longer. Tony leaned against his father's Jeep, his arms crossed. His Letterman jacket was stained, and he hadn't bothered shaving, which was no matter. He wasn't getting kissed by me anyway. "What took you so long?" he snapped. I guess it hadn't occurred to him that yelling at me for being late would only waste time. I was supposed to pick up the liquor from Ryan 10 minutes ago. "Sophia, this is your opening. Tell Tony to kiss your skinny jean-clad butt and go back inside." "Then go. I don't have to come along," I said, placing my hands on my hips. Tony's brown eyes widened, and he shook his head. "I wasted time waiting for you. You're coming," he demanded. Tony glanced down at his phone, and then abruptly entered the car. Okay then. I hopped onto the passenger side, having a bit of trouble because of my boots. He rolled his eyes at my struggle. "You know that I drive a Jeep. Why did you wear those shoes?" he complained. "Because they go with my outfit," I responded, thinking that nothing, not even my friends, were worth this crap. It turned out that Ryan was in a rush and didn't have time to buy liquor for a high school party. So Tony moped the only way he knew how, by turning the radio up so loud that my ears ached. That was fine by me. I didn't want him to yell at me like he always had the habit of doing. I spent the ride studying the affluent neighborhoods of Westgrove. The houses stretched for what seemed to be miles, and most of them were gated. I lived in a 3-bedroom home about 10 minutes from the center of town. As I stared at where the affluent members of the town lived, I couldn't help but think of my flighty mother. She had me at 16 and struggled to put a roof over our head for a few years. Her mother was displeased with the pregnancy and had thrown her out. After a few years, she realized that living the hard life wasn't for her. She dropped me off at my father's mother's house and only saw me whenever she had the time. My father, meanwhile, decided to go back to school and get an education. He spent as much time as he could with me, and once he graduated, he got a job teaching and bought a place for us to live. I had been happy with my father. Really, it had been a dream come true for me. A child who felt unwanted. But then my father got a call that my grandmother was going to lose her house, so he took me away from all my friends and we moved in with her. So far, the transition hadn't been too horrible. Mainly because Yasmine took me under her wing. I had shared lip gloss with her when hers had met an unfortunate fate at the hands of a teacher that had taken it from her. She introduced me to Tony, and we started dating that week. If I was being honest with myself, I only gave him the time of day because he filled a void that was left when I was separated from my best friend, Nikki. But he was a poor distraction. I had already grown bored with him. By the time we pulled into the driveway of a remote log cabin, the rain was pelting the car. Without any thought to his girlfriend, Tony snatched up an umbrella from the back seat and left the car, rushing to the door. That was one clueless man. The worst thing about him was that he wasn't all that hot. Tony Jerkins could be described as average. He had chocolate skin, a goatee, and plain features. Yasmine once told me that had he not been so talented on the football field, no one would care about him. And I couldn't help but agree. I sighed, grabbed my clutch, and exited the car, the rain beginning to soak me through. I quickly ran onto the wide porch and walked through the door. The loud music, the only greeting that I received. The entry hall was virtually empty. Great. Now I'd have to walk around to find Yasmine. I entered the living room, where a dozen people were lounging around eating pizza. So this party wasn't quite poppin' yet? Figured. The smell of gooey cheese made my stomach growl. The living room didn't look too bad. The walls were painted a light olive. The carpet was a soft brown. Aside from a couple of leather couches, there were 2 recliners, which were occupied by guys who had girls on their laps. I glanced around and realized that the only person I knew personally was Isaiah Lewis. He was sitting on a stool that had been dragged in from the kitchen, stuffing his face. My friend glanced up at me and grinned. "Hey, Sophia." "Hi. Where's Yasmine?" I asked. "Upstairs in the master bedroom," he answered, before gesturing to a hallway. When I entered the hallway, I noticed there was a winding staircase that led to the second floor. Groaning, I began making the journey up the wooden staircase, clutching the banister so I wouldn't slip and break my neck. When I finally finished ascending the stairs, I found myself in a hallway that had wooden floors and 4 doors. I decided to try the first one to my left. Without even bothering to knock, I opened the door and entered. Yasmine, Craig Daniels, and Tony were sitting in a bedroom that was only furnished with a futon. When I entered, Craig smiled at me, probably to show off his straight white teeth. Yasmine waved, but made no move to invite me to sit with her. Awkward, I thought. I wouldn't have bothered coming in here if it hadn't been for my promise to her. "I heard you're the reason that I have no beer." Craig's smile abruptly turned into a scowl. I shot a glare at Tony, the coward who didn't mind throwing me under the bus. "We were running late," I said, making sure that he felt some of the heat. He did pick me up 45 minutes late, after all. "You know, Sophia, why don't you go downstairs and get some pizza?" Yasmine suggested, her hazel eyes wide. Yasmine McDonald's was a half-Irish, half-Mexican girl who had a rosy complexion. She had beautiful black ringlets that I envied. Though I was also mixed-raced, I was the opposite from her. I had curly dark brown hair, tan skin, and had my grandmother's figure and full plumped lips. The only thing that showed that I had some Irish in me was my emerald green eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked, confused. Craig groaned. "Yasmine, let's give these two some time to talk," Craig suggested. "I'm hungry." "Why do we need to talk?" I asked. I was hoping it could lead to an argument where I could shout that I wanted nothing to do with him. "You promised," Yasmine snapped, her eyes flashing. "Promised what?" I asked, aggravated. Would someone just spill it out already? "I bribed Tony into dating you so that Yasmine and I could have some alone time. You are her only single friend," Craig said in a flat tone. "But Tony over here doesn't want to date you because he wants to date some chick from another school. I told him he could date the both of you, but he doesn't want to get caught. You aren't worth it." I eyed Yasmine, who glanced down at her feet, her gaze obviously having some trouble meeting mine. Oh, hell no. I suffered the misery that was Tony Jerkins because some jerk was tired of sharing his girlfriend? And wait, the unremarkable Tony Jerkins had to be paid to date me? I wasn't model pretty, but had pleasing features. My mother once explained that I wasn't Hollywood pretty, but I still had good looks. Why did Craig think that I would have problems getting a boyfriend on my own? "Look, Sophia, I tried getting Tony to break up with you as soon as I found out," Yasmine pleaded. I would have told her that she should have told me, but then the window panes exploded. At first, I thought it was from a brick that a vandal threw, but then the scent of smoke began filling the air. "Smoke," I said, turning on my heels, figuring that I could confront Tony another day. "It's probably from the fire pit. I think that Tara and Ashley wanted to roast marshmallows or something." Really? They were going to attempt to roast marshmallows without supervision? Neither of those girls were very bright. "But the smoke smells so close, and what happened to the window?" Yasmine asked, her eyes filling with concern. As the smell increased, I began coughing. My eyes began watering, which told me that I needed to get the hell out of there. Yasmine, who was the quickest to react, sped out of the room. I moved to follow, but was stopped by a hard body. I frowned. I didn't see anything, but I could feel strong arms pushing me back into the room. What was going on? "Move!" Craig shouted, his tone agitated. Figuring that the quarterback would have better luck shoving what seemed to be an invisible person, I stepped aside so that Craig could shove at the figure. "What the hell?" Craig asked, as his body pushed against what looked like nothing. "Tony, help me!" I turned to see Tony struggling to move. "Someone's got me!" he cried. I thought quickly, snatching up the heavy purse that Yasmine had left behind. "Tony, where are you being held?" I asked frantically, but Tony didn't respond. His face was losing color, and he began punching the air behind him with his fists. It was obvious that he was being choked by something. Without hesitation, I ran behind Tony and began beating his assailant with the purse. "Stupid human!" a scratchy voice hissed, and Tony was suddenly flung away from me. "No!" I cried as I saw. My mind couldn't process the vision in front of me. Blood was pouring from Tony's stomach, splashing against the hard wood. His stomach had just been sliced wide open. He was dead. I knew that, but I still ran over to him and pressed my fingers to his pulse. Nothing. Suddenly, The indignation that I felt at having someone purchase a boyfriend for me faded. Instead, the devastation of a life being lost in front of me filled my chest. It hurt, not feeling a pulse. Why? How? What was his family going to do without him? Was I next? That thought sprung me into action. I needed another weapon. The purse obviously just agitated the invisible foe into killing. I dropped Yasmine's purse and snatched up the clutch that I had dropped. I searched the clutch frantically until I found my cell phone. My fingers quickly dialed 911, but even before I could press the phone to my ear, it was yanked away. My poor lifeline crashed against the wall and clattered to the floor out of my reach. "Stupid human." When the scratchy voice sounded again, I glanced over at Craig, who had fared better than Tony. His knuckles were red, but he had cuts along his arms. He threw a punch that connected with flesh, but the creature must have moved, because his next punch collided with the door jamb, and by his pained cry, it was obvious that he probably just shattered a knuckle or two. Even with his shattered knuckles, he attempted to flee, but something grabbed him from behind and began dragging him across the room. As that occurred, someone wrapped their arms around my throat and began choking me.
Chapter 3. Reginald.
Bro,
Raph said, his shocked face filling my vision.
I can see you.
I know, I said, the pain slowly fading as I released contact with durability for a moment.
Call the others, Raph.
Raph dug through his backpack and placed his phone to his ear.
Marissa, we need you and Kent to come help us. They are here.
Raph's inflection of "they" told our friends how urgent this was. After ending the call, Raph packed away his phone and handed me my sword. The gold-studded weapon was about 2 feet long and burned everyone that touched it without my permission. I gripped its hilt, and Raph pulled out his sword and closed his bag. Then we both stood.
I hope that we aren't too late,
Raph said as he began speeding toward the woods. I followed him as I mentally scanned the presences in the cabin. Isaiah. My brother was there. Crap. I needed to rescue him. He was my priority. As soon as the cabin came into view, I spotted the first one. He was nothing more than a head with smooth skin and no features, and a torso. Dark skin stretched over a skull, and his naked torso wasn't even covered by a shirt. I quickly shot a bolt of depletion at the "it," I suppose. This may sound a bit sexist, but I prefer to think of them as men. Fighting a woman was just plain wrong. He moved, and my bolt demolished the door, letting out the tendrils of smoke that they emitted. I tended to use my abilities before engaging them in combat. Raph enjoyed using his sword. The man was squaring up, prepared to blast me with heat, when Raph took off his head without preamble. I darted inside, yelling, "Fire!" as I moved. Luckily for me, the guests had abandoned their food and drinks and were crowded by the back door. Before they could see me, I sped up the stairs and spotted another one of them. This one was merely a head, so one shot of depletion made him vanish. There were humans in the room to my left. I needed to rescue them before they became food. When I sensed Craig Daniels, I was tempted to leave him to his fate. But a girl, Sophia Sanchez, didn't deserve what was going to happen to her. Without hesitation, I stormed into the room and let out a curse. There weren't simply half-formed. He was tall, with short black hair, copper skin, and blue eyes. He wore black pants and sneakers. He stood there, choking the life out of a green-eyed beauty. I had to destroy him. He was missing one feature, a nose. If he gained it by drinking the energy of humans, then he would become visible. I leaped toward them, but the man was confident that I wouldn't reach him. A scalding hot pain to my back told me that I was being flanked. Cursing, I spun around and lashed out with my sword, lobbing off the arm of a half-formed creature. He shrieked in pain, but before I could take off his other arm, another fully formed man exited the closet and tossed a ball of fire at me. I dodged and yanked the half-formed man in front of me as a shield. Just like I hoped, the man's smoke fizzled out. As soon as it did, I quickly stabbed the half-formed man through the neck, and he was no more. The man that was attempting to gain nourishment from Sophia released her after he saw me kill his companion. Both men, one missing a nose and the other missing an ear, glanced at one another, and it was obvious that they saw me as a threat, because they both charged me. "Take Sophia and run!" I yelled at the barely conscious quarterback. Both men shot fireballs at me. Luckily, the balls didn't become deadly until they touched something, so when they flew over Sophia's body, she didn't feel the heat. But the wall that I had been standing in front of evaporated. The view of the second bedroom was now unobstructed. What was unfortunate was that my brother Isaiah was in the room, in the process of scooping up a barely conscious girl. I cursed and spun around to face the two men. Before he could toss a fireball at me, I tossed depletion at him, and he began to shriek as his arm disintegrated. His partner, however, was able to toss a ball at me that clipped my arm. "You can't hurt my brother!" Isaiah shouted before leaping in front of me, obviously to take the next fireball. Both men attempted to converge on my brother, but I darted around him and fired another bolt of depletion from my hand. Good. Now the man that was missing a nose was also missing an arm and a leg. His howl made Isaiah curse. "Isaiah, I was born to do this. Run!" I ordered. I concentrated on the other man, eager to impede his progress in attaining a physical form. But he scurried away, behind his injured friend, probably attempting to seek out Sophia and the power her energy offered. I shot toward the man who was howling and plunged my sword into his side while shooting depletion at his partner. The man that I shot shifted, so he only lost a hand, but the man I stabbed collapsed to the ground, a gash in his side. Without hesitation, I lopped off his head. Then I focused on the now howling man. He was about 10 feet from Sophia, and my energy was beginning to seep away. The cramps were probably going to begin again in a moment. I wouldn't be able to protect my brother after that happened. "Isaiah, run!" I hoarsely shouted.
"No point in running. More of us are here. All your friends are going to die."
I ignored the man and dove at him and earned a ball of fire to the gut. Even while touching durability, I still felt the sting. When I didn't evaporate into nothing, the man cursed. My sword arm shook, and part of me hoped that Raph would rush to my aid. But he was fighting his own battle, so I had to figure out how to kill the man.
"What's wrong, Talented? Are you getting weak?"
The man taunted as he threw another fireball at me. This time, I lashed out with my sword, mostly because I was too tired to use velocity. The fireball collided with the man that had thrown it. The impact of the flame flattened the man, but he didn't burn to death. I had to get him away from Sophia before he drained her energy and made it his own. Before I could take a step, the cramps began. Sighing, I released my contact with awareness, and the pain lessened considerably. The man got to his feet and charged me. Now that I knew that my sword could deflect fireballs, I was watching him. I had my sword poised for a cut when I heard a startling bang, and the man's head exploded. My brother stood there, clutching a smoking shotgun. I dashed forward and quickly separated the man's neck from his body, but I couldn't stop the last of the fire from expelling. I quickly stood in front of the heat, allowing it not to reach my brother. The burning sensation made me curse as the fire continued to burn me. It was fortunate that I had chosen to lose contact with awareness, because I'd be dead right now if I had lost contact with durability. When the pain faded, I scanned the room. Sophia was sitting up, her eyes filled with horror, while fury covered Isaiah's face. "Did I get him?" Isaiah asked, hopeful. "Yes, but next time, move after you shoot one of them."
What was that?
Sophia asked as my vision thankfully faded. "I don't know. I just know that I have to hunt them," I responded. "How do you know that?" Isaiah challenged. "Look, we need to get out of here," I snapped, releasing my hold on durability and calling on awareness. As soon as my body wasn't durable anymore, sharp pain alerted me that I had an injury. Before I could even steady my breathing or bring back durability, I pitched backwards, landing on my back, which was currently on fire. After banging my head against the floor, I was knocked out of the fight.
Chapter 4. Sophia. "Is he all right?" I asked Isaiah as the stranger's sword clattered to the ground. Isaiah stared at me with horror. "Reginald will be fine," he said uncertainly. "Can you stand?" he asked me. I felt weak, and I was freezing. But I could stand. Once I did, Isaiah glanced at me. "Can you go check on Craig? I need to get my brother out of here," he insisted as he eyed Reginald's sword warily. I didn't blame him. Though he had hacked invisible people with it, there wasn't a speck of blood on it. "Don't touch the sword," a harsh voice warned from the doorway. My heart leaped into my throat as the realization that I could be facing more of the invisible people came into my mind. "Kent, Reggie's hurt," Isaiah said, barely hiding the panic that he felt. This was obviously a guy that loved his brother. "Leave the sword. Get Reggie out of here. The house will blow soon," Kent warned. What? First we faced invisible fire-wielding people, and now a bomb threat? Without being told twice, I sped from the room, passing Kent, the tall blonde that I'd seen on occasion, and quickly descended the stairs. Thankfully, all the other party guests had the presence of mind to vacate the cabin. I quickly exited the front door, my feet aching, my body shivering from shock. The minute I spotted Tony's truck, something twisted in my chest. Pain caused me to crumple to the muddy ground, unable to erase the way that the invisible man had killed him. Tears began falling down my face, washing away any evidence that I had perfected the smoky eye look. It was shocking. How hurt I was that Tony was gone. Goodness gracious! Not 2 hours ago he had wanted to dump me because no amount of money was worth putting up with me. And now that he was dead, it felt like I couldn't breathe. "Sophia?" A soft, tentative voice called. I glanced up and nearly was blinded by the flashlight that a shaking hand was holding. I gently pushed the beam away from my face. It took some furious blinking, but I could finally make out a beautiful Asian girl standing there. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that was smeared with blood. Her raincoat was slung over an arm. "Yes," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You were in there with Reginald, right?" the girl nervously asked, her worried eyes filling with tears. "Is he all right? Did they kill him? Kent told me not to go in the house." "He's fine," I said, remembering the brave guy that had saved me from being strangled to death. He was so handsome with black hair that was cut close to his scalp, dark brown determined eyes, and skin the color of caramel. "Why isn't he out here?" the girl asked, and the concern in her face made envy momentarily fill me. Was this his girlfriend? Was that why she was so concerned? He passed out. I think he overworked himself, I speculated. Without warning, I was lifted into strong arms and tossed over a shoulder. Marissa, touch awareness and velocity. We need to go. Reginald, who had barely been conscious before, yelled, Grab someone. He yelled that order as he sped away into the woods. My stomach ached as his broad shoulder dug into it. I wanted to complain, to tell him that I was about to vomit, but there was a loud boom that filled the night sky. What was that? I shrieked in horror. I think I got you to a safe distance, he reported, before stopping so that he could place me on my feet. Unlike the pretty girl who must have been the guy's girlfriend, he didn't have a flashlight, and barely any light sprinkled down from the stars in this section of the woods. I'll be back. No, I cried. Don't leave me, please. I desperately reached out and got a grip on his sweatshirt. He placed his strong hand on top of mine, and I tried to ignore the tingles, because it wasn't the time for that. I had to get the guy to stay. Sophia, I'll be back. I just need to make sure that your friends are all right, he told me. But that didn't convince me to release him. Who cared about those people? I was pretty sure that by Monday, all of them would be laughing at me for the simple fact that Tony Jerkins only dated me because he was paid to do so. I had no desire to be the butt of anyone's jokes. Can't your girlfriend do that? I asked, but the guy ignored me. I can't fight now, he cursed. And then I was scooped up into his arms, and this time I wasn't tossed over his shoulder. Press your head to my chest, he ordered. Without a question, I pressed my face to his chest. His frantic heartbeat vibrated against my lips. Fear made me unwilling to lift my head to see the danger. Don't be afraid. I'll get you out of here. Before I could ask Reginald what I should be afraid of, he ran. I ended up wrapping my arms around him to anchor myself, in case he dropped me. The speed made my stomach lurch and my head spin. Roller coasters weren't my favorite thing, and the least desirable part was the free fall. When he leaped and his feet were no longer on the ground, I let out a terrified scream. Tears began to soak Reginald's sweatshirt. He kept on jumping without touching the ground. When his feet finally hit the ground, he attempted to extricate himself from my grip, but I was just too terrified. The only person that had a defense against the invisible people and my other biggest fear, gravity, was right there. My panicked tears continued to wet my face until the guy pulled a strand of my hair. I let out a yelp and instinctively jerked away from him. My legs were so weak that I collapsed to the dirt. The guy gracefully sat down and took a deep breath. You pulled my hair, I hissed. You are hysterical, he said. I glanced around the area and it took me a moment. But I realized that the superhero had gotten us to the road. Can Isaiah run like you? I wondered. I hoped he was able to escape in time. No, he responded as he got to his feet. What are we doing here? Hitchhiking, he responded in a flat tone. Don't you have a car? I asked, wondering how he had arrived at the party in time to save us. No. Why not? I asked. Hoping that the guy was joking, I had no desire to hitchhike. Because I'm blind, he explained, and curiosity got the best of me. I stood in front of him and grabbed his face, the tingles floating from my arms to my heart when I touched his skin. It was dark, so it was impossible to assess his eyes. But if he was blind, how had he just run what had to be 20 miles without crashing into anything? He gently rested his hands on top of mine. Sophia, what are you doing? He asked, his voice making me feel faint for a moment. But then I cleared my throat and forced myself to say something. You weren't blind. Sophia, I don't have time to explain this to you. Yes, you do. I'm pretty sure that it will take a while for a car to come. By the way, do you know what road is? Sophia, Reginald said, sounding really annoyed. Do you want to release my face? You can't be blind, I said, still arguing with him. You just kicked butt back there. The only time I can see is when those monsters that tried to kill you are around, Reggie clarified. But how did you? They are called talents. If I contact them, I can do certain things. Now will you let go? He asked. Why does it bother you that I'm touching you? My question came out a bit too hostile, which made the guy stiffen. Didn't Yasmine tell you about us? He wondered. No. I doubt that Yasmine and I will be friends for much longer, not after Craig paid Tony to date me, I snarled, before reminding myself that this humiliation was something that I should have kept private. Why would you have Craig pay someone for you? No, Reg, you don't get it. Tony and Craig didn't tell me about their arrangement, so here I was, thinking I finally had a boyfriend, but nope, I was... You know, Sophia, you're squeezing my face, Reggie warned, his voice coming out funny. I released his face and gently caressed my palm with one of my fingers, as if I were tracing the surface of his handsome face. Anyway, so, you won't tell anyone about that, right? No, I will not tell anyone that your boyfriend only dated you for money, Reginald assured me. Good. So what happened with you and Yasmine? I asked. Reggie stiffened and then spun around. A car is coming, he reported, which startled me, mainly because he moved so damn quickly. I don't hear one, I noted, as I stepped beside him with feet that ached so badly that tears dripped from my eyes. What's wrong? He asked, sounding genuinely worried. My feet are killing me. My answer didn't elicit a peep from him, which was no surprise. He fought invisible people, which was a lot more dangerous than a few blisters. Who are the invisible people? I asked, to change the subject. I really wanted to sit on the ground to rest my feet. I don't know. The only guy that had a talent for knowledge died before he could tell us. The bitterness told me not to ask who the guy was and how he died. Why are you dressed like that? I followed my mother's stupid advice. She's a makeup artist to the stars. When I told her that I was having issues with keeping Tony's attention on me, she sent me this outfit. I commented. Where's that car that you spoke about? It's about 2 minutes away, Reg assured me. So, are you into makeup? No. Unlike my mom, I don't really have any talents. Do you feel better now that you know that Tony wasn't focused on you because he wasn't that into you? At least you know that there is nothing wrong with you. You see, there is something wrong with me. The guy should have wanted to date me without being bribed, I complained. If my feet weren't killing me, I would have stomped my foot at this point. Are you attached to those shoes in any way? He asked, urgency filling every inch of his tone. No, I answered. Then take them off and give them to me, he ordered. Figuring that he had a point to all of this, I bent down and took off my shoes, wincing as my blistered feet touched the cement. Reginald quickly snatched them from my hand, took a deep breath, and flung them. Moments later, I heard a piercing scream. Then he sighed in relief. An invisible person was there, and I couldn't even hear them. I squeaked, knowing that I was so close to ending up like Tony Jerkins. I began shaking, and Reginald wrapped his strong arms around me and the helplessness sank in. If these monsters attacked me at home, there was nothing I could do against them. Tears began pouring down my face again, but this time, Reggie's security kept most of the emotional pain at bay.
Chapter 5. Reginald. I clutched the warm and delicious girl to me as she shuddered, my mind trying to force myself not to care about her. But as she wrapped her arms around me and clung to me, my foolish heart felt fondness for her. She continued to sniffle even as the car drew near. It made me feel like a tool, but I had to stop her from crying.
Sophia,
I whispered.
we need to go. They might come back for us.
She clung to me even tighter, as if they were going to pull us apart. I sighed and gently removed her arms from me.
Sorry,
she said, her voice making me realize that she was embarrassed.
Wow, it's so cold out here.
Without hesitation, I stripped out of my sweatshirt and handed it to the girl. Before going after her, Kent had ordered me to clean up and put on new clothes. My old outfit had met a scorched end. Then, because I was the weakest of our foursome, I had been assigned to go after the girl, since it appeared that she was the only partygoer aside from Craig and Isaiah who hadn't been able to scramble into a vehicle. "Excuse me, sir!" I yelled as I pulled my folding cane from the dusty backpack that Kent had found in the cabin. Without hesitation, I tossed the filthy thing to the ground. Hopefully, once we were in the SUV, I'd be able to release contact with awareness. A window rolled down as I walked forward, tapping the cane to orient myself. "Need a ride?" a man asked in a friendly tone, which was odd. For all he knew, I could have been looking for directions. Something was up with this guy, but I couldn't take chances and linger here. We were all to return to town and meet at Marissa's house to recount what had happened, so I couldn't damn well refuse a ride.
Is he one of them?
Sophia asked as she grabbed my arm.
We'd be trapped here if he was working with them.
I doubt it, I said, deciding to take a chance. Feel free to hop in the back. I just went grocery shopping and have some snacks and drinks, he offered as I opened the back door on the passenger side and gestured for Sophia to enter. She got into the car and slid over to make space for me. As soon as the door closed, the man took off at such a high speed that I smacked the back of my head against the headrest. Luckily for Sophia, she had managed to get her seatbelt on and was knocked back into the seat. "What the hell? Can you slow down?" I shouted when I was forced to relinquish my hold on my folding cane so that I could buckle my seatbelt. "Sorry, Reginald. We need to get out of here before they find out that you're still alive," the stranger said as he continued driving like a maniac. When he uttered my name, I cursed. "Stop the car," I ordered, getting ready to use my talents to escape this car. "Relax, Reginald. I'm here to help. My name is Dwayne, and I'm a keeper," he told me. "What the hell is a keeper?" I demanded, my hands still clenched, my instincts begging me to leap out of the car with Sophia. "A group of people that aid the talented. I need to talk to the rest of your group," he shouted over the honking of his horn. I just didn't understand. He was the one that drove like an idiot, and he was the one beeping at people? But that was the least of my worries. I was still touching awareness and realized that we were heading away from my town.
Why are we going this way? Home is the other way,
Sophia cried, her hand yanking on one of my clenched fists. I sighed, relaxing my fist, and allowed her to clutch my hand. "Sophia, calm down. Reginald has terrible wounds. If we don't get him help, they'll become infected," Dwayne told me, worry in his tone. "I feel fine," I objected, taking a mental inventory of my body, only feeling the sting of forming blisters. I could take care of those later. "You'll start feeling the effects in an hour or two," Dwayne yelled.
"How do you know that Reg was injured?"
Sophia challenged. It's complicated, but give me 2 hours and I'll explain everything," he said. "I don't have 2 hours. My friends will notice I'm missing and come looking for me," I protested. "That's what I'm hoping for. The less humans get dragged into this, the better. Now, Sophia, how long have you and Reginald known each other?"
"For years,"
Sophia lied.
"My father and his mother were childhood friends."
"So, you can be trusted?" Dwayne asked, sounding unsure of himself.
"Of course. I've known about Reg's abilities ever since he accidentally broke my mother's eyelash curler,"
Sophia lied, seeming to become animated. Good. So, you know not to tell anyone? He asked.
Of course. Reg can trust me. I will never tell.
She squeezed my hand, letting me know that those last words were obviously meant for me. So, Sophia, you don't mind if I ask you a few questions about Reg to verify that you actually know him? Dwayne asked as his car made a sharp turn.
Of course not,
Sophia said, her voice hard. Sophia, who was Reg's first kiss? He asked.
Yasmine,
she answered, as I asked, how do you even know that? What's his brother's name? Dwayne continued.
Isaiah,
she answered. Who's older? Dwayne asked the question as if it were his trump card.
They are fraternal twins. Isaiah is older,
she offered, which made Dwayne sigh. Fine, the human can stay with us. This works out. Had she been a stranger, I would have had to dispose of her, Dwayne said, sounding uncomfortable.
You kill people?
Sophia screeched. No, I don't kill people. But if I had to, I would to protect Reginald, Raph, Marissa, and Kent. I've been assigned to them. Where were you when Key died? I challenged, anger suddenly tearing through me. Where were you when the... Suddenly, Dwayne pressed hard on the brakes, which made me pause for the simple fact that I hit a nerve. My father died trying to protect Key, so cool it, Dwayne hissed, which made me silent. Dwayne began driving again, his questions ceasing. As the miles evaporated between me and my friends, my mind began to turn over the facts. The stranger's father had also died because of my stupid mistake. Guilt was the only emotion that was racing through me. I tried to staunch it, but the wound was too deep. In the 10 months since my friend died, it hadn't healed. Sophia's hand left mine, and moments later, her seatbelt unbuckled, and she plopped herself in my lap, her knees on either side of my legs. She wrapped me in a hug, the seatbelt between us. Her hug was unexpected, and for a moment, I assumed that she was crying. So, when she drew back, I gently felt her cheeks and was surprised to find that they were dry. She sucked in a breath at my touch. Judging by her accelerated heartbeat, she was attracted to me. That would fade as soon as the hero warship did. Moments later, Dwayne braked hard, causing me to clutch Sophia to me to prevent her from getting hurt. She held me close, and it was stupid, but her touch felt nice. Why did it feel nice? After the number that Yasmine had done on me, I figured that I'd be smarter than to allow Sophia to evoke any feelings. I had to fight this. But as much as I wanted to push her away by saying something rude, her vulnerability had nearly devastated me.
You okay?
Sophia asked as she pressed her face to my chest. Fine, I lied, not wanting to get into it with her. I didn't think that I would ever express how I felt to Raph, and he was like a brother to me.
Liar,
she said as she let out a yawn.
But I understand why you don't want to talk about it.
You can? Dwayne asked as he opened the door to the back seat.
Of course,
Sophia snapped. Then you should enlighten me, Sophia, Dwayne said. The cold air smacking against my bare arms told me that leaving the car wasn't going to be a very pleasant experience. As soon as the girl who had attempted to comfort me exited the car, I did so as well. Dwayne handed me my cane, unfolded so that I could traverse the driveway.
This is a cozy house,
Sophia told me. It looks like the type of place that you would want to take a nap in. It's only a 2-bedroom, and since I don't have couches yet, you and Reg can share a bed, since you are such good friends, Dwayne announced, sounding smug.
Fine by me,
Sophia said, her tone making it obvious that she had given Dwayne a dirty look.
But you'll have to treat Reg first.
No, you'll treat Reg. I'll instruct you. After you learn, you'll be able to help the others when they get injured, Dwayne announced.
What if I hurt him?
Sophia protested. You won't, Dwayne assured her. Right, Reg?
Only I call him Reg,
Sophia protested.
It is Reginald to you.
I'm sure it is, Dwayne laughed. So, Sophia, are you hungry?
Not really. I'm wired up,
she confessed.
I don't think I can eat or sleep after one of those invisible things killed.
I sighed at Sophia's inability to voice what happened and gently wrapped my arms around her. She'd been standing on the bottom step when she was speaking. She shuddered as she wrapped her arms around my neck and drew me in, forehead to forehead. Her touch made sparks run up and down my body. Her body was affected by mine. The beautiful heartbeat that reached my ears made it obvious. I held her closer to me, ignoring the wind. Man, having this girl in my arms was becoming addictive, which was terrifyingly annoying. Why did I have to feel this way about someone? Why couldn't I be like Kent, who only cared about books and his mother? Are you two friends coming? Dwayne teased, but neither of us moved. Instead, I pulled back and gently kissed her forehead. Why in the hell did I do that? Well, her heart pounded once I did, which told me that she had enjoyed the move. Good. At least I knew that she was genuinely into me now. I just couldn't let her hero worship interest smother my good sense.
Chapter 6. Sophia. Dwayne lived in a one-story, lightly furnished home. It smelled of fresh wood and barely dried paint, which told me that this place had just been constructed. Reg was hardly able to walk when we entered the bedroom. The bedroom only had a sleigh bed and a massage table set up beside the bed. "All right, Reginald," Dwayne said, as he turned to face me. "Hop on up." He tapped the table, but Reg, whose eyes were drooping from exhaustion, didn't step forward. I grabbed his hand and pulled him forward, until his hand rested on the table. "Step up. There's a stool in front of your left leg." Reg followed my directions, and after he was sitting on the table, Dwayne smirked. "Reg, take off your shirt," he ordered. When the hot man took off his shirt, I sucked in a breath. Though most of his skin was nice and smooth, there were blisters forming on his arm and down his back. "Good. We can still help him. I would hate for those things to pop," Dwayne said before leaving the room. Reg looked confused, as if he had no idea what Dwayne was talking about. "Help me with what?" the injured guy asked as he balled up his shirt. "I've had worse." Because I wanted to stall, I gently plucked the shirt from his hands and folded it. "Well, it isn't that bad," I lied. "Just relax and Dwayne will take care of you." To add more comfort, I gently rested my hand on his shoulder, and he sucked in a breath that told me that he liked my touch. "There, Craig. Here is a man that can appreciate the fact that I'm a catch. And the best part is that the response was 100% genuine and did not have to be purchased." "Usually we put ice on the blisters until they pop. It's disgusting, but nothing that I can't handle," Reg explained. Dwayne whistled when he returned, pulling a cart with a bucket of steaming hot water and a bottle of purple liquid, a stack of towels, and bandages. "No, Sophia, you will treat him," Dwayne corrected me, and I glanced down at my hands. "Seriously?" I asked. "Yes, the more people that know how to treat these wounds, the better. And since Reg is your best friend, I figure that he could trust you." Was that a challenge in Dwayne's blue eyes? Oh, no, he didn't. I, Sophia, no middle name because my father couldn't think of one Sanchez, was never going to give up the goods. I wanted to live, after all. Let's get this over with, Reg groaned. I'm starving. Reginald, lay on your stomach, Dwayne ordered. I'm going to instruct Sophia on how to treat your first wound. Then I will go get you guys some food and fresh clothes. Hold up. I'm more of a visual learner, I protested. But Dwayne sent a glare in my direction that reminded me that he would dispose of me if he had to. Sophia, soak a towel with hot water and wash down the blister, Dwayne directed. I grabbed one of the hand towels and dipped it in the bucket of water. Then I gripped the towel tightly and gently touched the red blister with the cloth. Rub the wound until the skin around the blister begins to become wrinkly. Was he for real? If this blister popped, I would seriously upchuck all over Dwayne and his loafers. Come on! Who wore loafers when trying to rescue someone that was battling invisible men? Now that I thought of it, he wore a suit and tie with loafers. Where were his dress shoes? When I noticed that the skin around the blister began to wrinkle, I stopped brushing the blister with a towel. Good. Now take the salve and put some on your finger, and rub it into the blister, he ordered. With hands that were steady from the hours that my mother attempted to teach me how to perfect certain looks with a brush, I dipped the green salve onto my finger and gently rubbed the cream into his skin. When the surface of the blister was coated green, I glanced over at Dwayne, who had a surprised expression on his face. What next? He didn't speak for a moment, which was irritating. The poor guy had other injuries that needed to be treated before I lost my nerve and screamed at the ill-dressed keeper to do it. He didn't shock you? Dwayne asked, confused. Shock me? I asked. But Reg hadn't reacted, which told me that he either knew what Dwayne was talking about or was too sleepy to care. He was supposed to shock you. You are unfamiliar to him, so if you are to try to treat him, his body will give up a current to keep you away. But I do know him, I snapped, agitated that this buffoon was seriously going to put me in harm's way to prove a point. The shock on Dwayne's face quickly turned into determination. Cover the blisters with the bandages, he ordered, and I quickly obeyed. Get us food, Reg finally mumbled. Dwayne nodded. Pizza? He asked. I'm more of a Chinese food kind of girl, I responded. Chicken teriyaki, beef and broccoli, and crab ragoons are 3 of my favorites. Reginald, how about you? Dwayne asked in a tight voice. He was obviously annoyed with me, but I just shot him a grin. I like poo-poo platters, he responded, and shrimp fried rice. Dwayne exited the room in a hurry, and as soon as the front door closed, I began singing. More to help me get my groove. He had 3 blisters on his arms, but his bag had to have 15. I used the bigger bandages to cover several at a time. When the last wound was treated, I stood and shoved the cart into the corner. I'm finished, I sang in a soprano, even performing jazz hands. Yep, music always improved my mood. He sat up and stretched, his eyes seeming to be clear of sleep. If Reg could have slept through the various tight ease and belting, then he was obviously a deep sleeper. So, you sing, Sophia? He asked, the amusement on his handsome face making my heart rate increase. He was by far the sexiest guy I had ever met. Yep, my father forced me to go to lessons when I was younger to keep me entertained. I also played piano and was in drama club in my old school. That doesn't surprise me, he teased. Hey, are you saying that I'm dramatic? I said, placing my hands on my hips. You'll have to take that back or I'll purposely drool on your chest when we sleep. I can sleep on the floor, Sophia, Reg quickly offered, which pissed me off. What's wrong with sharing a bed with me? I asked, defensive. I'm trying to be a gentleman, Sophia. Do you seriously want to share a bed with a guy that you barely know? I eyed the bed and swallowed. He was right. The prospect of being so close to him was... As long as you behave, I responded, having to clear my throat multiple times to spit out the words. Reginald nodded. Do you need to call your parents? He asked me, which made me laugh. I had to get rid of the tension somehow. My grandmother is probably glad that I'm gone. She's probably having a party, I remarked. My dad is away for the weekend and he doesn't call much. Why not? Reginald wondered. Because my parents had me when they were 15. It was too late to get rid of me when my mother finally realized she was preggers. I exaggerated a bit about my grandmother. She wasn't this huge party animal who hated my presence. She was just unused to having a teenager in the house. I was pretty sure that she was asleep and wouldn't notice that I was missing until she woke up in the morning. Hopefully either Reg or Dwayne could return me by then. My mother and brother will be worried, but I highly doubt that Dwayne will let me use his phone. No helping it. I'll just have to go home when I have more energy. Before I could agree, the front door crashed open, banging against the wall. Sorry, Dwayne yelled, sounding regretful of the racket that he made. I have the food. All that was open at this hour was some fast food place. I hope you're okay with burgers. He entered the bedroom. The smell of food made my stomach rumble. I quickly ran out of the room and to the bathroom to wash my hands. When I was finished, I entered the room and plopped down on the bed beside the bag of takeout. Reg quickly leapt from the massage table and eagerly fled the room. Dwayne placed 2 water bottles beside me and exited without even saying a word to me. Thank you, I shouted, but a door slamming told me he couldn't care less about my gratitude. Well, screw him. The jerk was going to kill me anyway, so he was lucky that he earned my thanks to begin with. Moments later, Reg entered with 2 shopping bags. He placed them on my other side, then eyed me. What's in there? He asked. 1 cheeseburger, 1 wrap, 1 large fries, and 2 slices of apple pie. I don't know about you, but do you think Dwayne is making a statement about my weight? I asked, which made Reg chuckle. I mean, the wrap is tiny, while the burger is like the size of Jupiter. We'll share, he offered as he sat on the hard wood. I gathered the food and water and joined him. When I placed the box containing the burger on his lap, Reggie's eyes widened. He opened the box and seemed surprised by it. I bit into my wrap and nearly spat it back out. Lettuce, tomato, and avocado? I tried not to gag, but some sounds came out. Reg, who had taken a bite of his sandwich, frowned. You don't like your wrap? He asked, concerned. Lettuce, tomato, and avocado? What kind of fast food restaurant serves that? I almost gagged in disgust. He chuckled and held his burger out to me. I quickly took a healthy bite and nearly laughed. Dwayne had gotten the both of us vegetarian meals. What statement do you think he's trying to make about his choice of food? Reg chuckled. Taste my wrap, then we'll be even, I offered, and the guy shook his head. I do like vegetables, don't get me wrong. I just don't like avocados, he commented. Neither do I admitted, as I took another bite of the veggie burger, which was stuffed with what had to be a garden salad. After my third bite, I handed the sandwich back to Reg, who continued eating it in silence. When he was finished, he pulled out sweet potato fries and we shared them in silence. I only had a few more bites of the wrap. I ate it without complaining much. Then we got to what had to be the most delicious apple pie. Of course, the genius didn't give us a fork to eat it with, so we had to eat the pies with our hands. After drinking the water, We both sat there in silence for what had to be a half an hour or so. I didn't know what Reg was feeling, but I just had to let my system calm down so that it could function better. After I let out a yawn, Reg insisted that I use the shower first. Dwayne did something right. He bought me packaged underwear, a pair of shorts and a tank top, and jeans with a flannel shirt that I hoped no one would catch me in. But hey, at least the clothes were clean and fit me. After I showered and changed into the shorts and tank top, I balled up my smoke-filled clothing and, except for my bra and the hoodie, tossed them in the trash can that was between the sink and the toilet. Then, my weary body climbed into the sleigh bed, and I fell asleep before Reg could even leave the room.
Chapter 7. Reginald. My eyes flew open, and I let out a curse when I realized that I had perfect vision. Without my sword, I was helpless, and not to mention Sophia was asleep beside me. Her face was peaceful, and her delicate features made my chest ache. I had to protect her, but I couldn't leave her unattended. I made contact with awareness and sensed 5 of them out there surrounding one of the talented. I was never acquainted with her, so couldn't identify her energy, but it was obvious that the talented was in trouble. Somehow, I would have to defeat 5 people without a blade. After standing, I knelt by Sophia's bedside and gently shook her. Her eyes flew open, and her green eyes met mine, and it was like she could read me because she cursed. "How many?" she demanded. 5, I responded. Sophia wrapped me in a tight embrace, her face pressing into my chest, and I quickly returned the embrace. When she pulled back, her eyes told me that she was going to be brave. Hopefully, that courage saved her life. We didn't bother changing into our clothes. Dwayne hadn't packed shoes for Sophia, so she settled for wearing a pair of thick, knee-high socks that she found in one of the bags. Then she stood and followed me out into the yard. Dwayne must have heard a disturbance that I didn't pick up, because he was now in the middle of the circle. The day was cloudy, and the frost-coated wind nearly sliced my skin in half. It was so cold. Sophia shivered, and I regretted that I didn't have a jacket to give her to ease her discomfort. Without hesitation, I pushed Sophia behind me and shot depletion at the back of the head of the nearly formed man. Since I was behind him, I couldn't see what was missing from him. He screamed as the lower half of his body separated from the top half. Another bolt of depletion silenced his screams altogether. I hit the man beside him, who caught on and only lost an arm. But when he dodged, he did what I wanted. He gave me the view of the unconscious talented lying on the ground, cuts all over her body. They were going to torture her to death the way they had Key. Fury nearly burned my heart as I eyed the 4 remaining creatures. They were going to die. I shot another bolt at the man howling over his broken arm, and he evaporated. The only thing left was the quickly freezing steam where his body used to be. I guessed that the rage intensified my bolts. The 3rd man eyed me and raised a hand, his intention to toss a fireball at me. But I made contact with durability so that I could withstand the fire. Sophia shoved me to the side, and the man's fireball went to the side, going wild. Then I heard a 3rd man howl in pain. This was making no sense. Why weren't the 3 men giving me a run for my money? They should have been crowding in and beating me up by now. I looked over at Sophia, who was on one of the men's back, a pocket knife slicing his skin. He had no arms, so he couldn't grab at her. Content that she was distracting him properly, I destroyed the last 2 with 2 quick bolts of depletion. I turned to Sophia and saw that he was trying to twist his head to burn her, but she had a grip on his neck and was gripping it hard. I gently plucked her off his back and blasted him into nothing but particles.
Are there any more?
She asked me. I scanned the trees as my awareness stretched out. 3 more, Dwayne, who had been covering the girl, told me. Those 5 were torturing Sherry. The other 3 are lookouts. Sherry isn't human, I said, confused. Why would they bother having lookouts? In order for the trespassers to enter our world, they need to drain a certain number of humans to make them powerful enough to drain a talented. My guess is that they were keeping Sherry busy for a fully formed friend, Dwayne speculated.
So, in order to drain a talented, the trespassers need to drain a lot of humans?
Sophia asked, shocked. Yes, Dwayne said wearily. Then, his face tightened with determination. Reginald, take Sophia out of here. Sherry is barely conscious. She can't protect you, I protested, even though I wanted to follow his advice. Sophia was human and couldn't defend herself from an attack. Don't worry about me, Dwayne said as he lifted Sherry.
Can you carry them both?
Sophia eyed the battered girl with a frown. Before I could answer the question, my awareness picked up the last person that I even expected to see out in this isolated home. Crap, I swore. We have problems. A gunshot fired, and then another one, followed by howls of pain. Gunshots? Dwayne asked, confused. Who's shooting? My brother, I cursed, my heart going into overdrive. A minute later, a trespasser ran toward me at full speed. The only thing missing from him was an ear. I blasted him with depletion, and he moved, the bolt only tearing a hole in his shoulder. Moments later, he spun around to face Raph, who was clutching a sword. Before I could even do a thing, the man's body exploded when Raph's sword drove into his chest, me only knowing where he had scored the blow by the tip sticking out of his back. 2 more to go, Dwayne said as I heard another gunshot. Moments later, Marissa, her hair put up in a ponytail, sailed into the clearing, Isaiah on her back, clutching a gun. Stay with Sophia, Raph hissed as Kent entered the clearing with Craig Daniels on his back, also clutching a firearm. The 2 sluggish trespassers clambered into the clearing, holes in various parts of their bodies. They eyed the 2 talented with humans on their backs, and that was apparently what Raph needed. He beheaded the other from behind while sending a bolt of depletion at the other. I had never been so happy to see darkness in my life. The minute I sagged in relief, Sophia nearly knocked me over when she wrapped her arms and legs around me. Raph, being an idiot, wolf whistled. The display of affection made no sense to me until I felt tears soaking my sweatshirt. Without hesitation, I wrapped my arms around her to offer her comfort, and then she pulled back and jumped to the ground.
Who is going to treat Sherry?
She asked Dwayne. I will. Just go home. I need to call my superiors and figure out what to do, the keeper said. Do about what? We smoked those guys, Raph said as he walked over to me and slapped me on the back. You broke the rules by telling humans about your gifts. I have to figure out how to solve this. Reginald is my brother, Isaiah argued. He was supposed to hide this from me forever? Well, no. Do you have any talents? Dwayne asked, hopeful. Am I supposed to? Yes, you aren't a full-blooded talent, of course, but you will have some talents. I'll have to train with you. Marissa, do you have an attachment to Craig Daniels?
No. Why?
She asked, agitated. Then I'll have to dispose of him. He
is Marissa's boyfriend,
Sophia blurted out.
They're having a fight right now.
Really? Marissa asked, interested.
Yes, Craig was getting upset because Marissa wasn't spending enough time with him,
Sophia lied convincingly. Since I have no way to disprove this, I'll let him live for now. But if I find that Marissa doesn't have an attachment to Craig, he dies.
Understood,
Sophia said.
Now let's go. I don't want my father getting upset with me.
I scooped Sophia up in my arms and rushed into the warm house. After placing her on the bed, I fetched the bag of clothes and tossed a pair of jeans in her direction, along with my hoodie from the night before. I needed to have a group meeting with everyone so that I could catch them up. Change, I said tersely, not meaning to sound hostile after Sophia's quick thinking just saved Craig's life.
Are you mad at me, Reg?
She asked in a soft tone.
I didn't mean to upset you.
No, I responded. I'm just in a hurry. Sorry. I think we need to tell our friends what's going on. I can hear Marissa. She's upset that you exaggerated her relationship with Craig.
Oh,
Sophia said as she stood. I lifted her into my arms and sped out of the house. Raph, are we running all the way back? I asked. I took my father's old Hummer. We all should fit, Craig carefully said, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to punch his teeth in, because he was suffering the same way that I had when I lost Key. And I hated to think it, but had I been fast enough, this wouldn't have happened to Tony Jerkins. Thanks for saving Sherry and me, Dwayne told us. No problem. We didn't want to lose another soldier, Raph said, and then he sped off. Isaiah, you're with me, Kent said, sounding excited by the prospect.
Come on, Craig. It looks like I'll be giving you a ride,
Marissa insisted. Happy with who I had in my arms, I sped past Marissa and followed Raph to the car. Everyone piled into the Hummer without hesitation. Marissa, Kent, Raph, Sophia, and I squeezed into the back. Then Craig Daniels floored it as if he were on a car chase.
Slow down,
Marissa shouted.
They aren't here.
Craig eased off a bit, which relieved me because getting into a car accident was the last thing I wanted to do. Where to? Craig demanded.
I need to check in with my grandma,
Sophia responded, her voice worried. Here, Isaiah said, passing her clutch to her.
Thanks,
Sophia said, before pulling out her phone.
Grandma?
Sophia asked, and I couldn't help it. I made contact with Echo so I could eavesdrop.
Sophie, did you have fun sleeping over at Marissa's house?
She asked, sounding groggy.
Yes,
the girl beside me said.
Jenny is staying with me this afternoon,
her grandmother said.
Have fun. Okay, Grandma,
Sophie said before ending the call.
Thanks, Marissa,
Sophie said.
Thanks for what?
The only female talented in the car snapped.
For telling my grandmother that I was having a sleepover at your house?
I did that, Isaiah said from the front seat. I didn't want her to worry.
Well, good. More lies about me that people won't tell me about,
Marissa muttered.
Sorry, Marissa, I had to lie. Dwayne would have killed Craig, even if he didn't want to. It's okay, Sophia, but why would Dwayne kill Craig? Who is Dwayne? Why didn't you two meet up with us last night? We were so worried. We had to sleep to become strong enough to go after you.
Marissa's words were filled with both curiosity and confusion. Yeah, and how did you get away from it? Raph asked. Not that I'm not glad to see Sophia still breathing. We need to meet so we can talk strategy, Craig said from the front seat. I wanted to tell Craig to shut his trap, but held back the comment. At least Craig had the presence of mind to take charge. And the annoying quarterback was right. We did need to talk.
Chapter 8. Sophia. We can go to my house, Craig offered. My parents won't be home. Works for me, Kent piped up, his voice sounding amenable. Kent, a handsome blonde, had a hardness to his features. I had a feeling that he had seen something terrible in his life. Craig drove into town, and I was relieved when I saw the familiar buildings, cozy homes, and clean parks. When Craig drove down the street that I lived on, I was grateful to spot that nothing had changed. The overgrown lawn of the old man that lived across the street from my grandmother, the American flag that hung from the pole of another home, and the clunker in the driveway that my father bought and fixed up for me were all there. Being in familiar territory did so much to ease my anxiety. Then, my heart nearly split into two when we passed a blue 3-family house that had cars parked in the driveway and around the front of the property. Memories of spending the weeknights listening to music and watching movies in the entertainment room haunted me. A tear trickled down my cheek when I noticed that someone had drove Tony's car to his house. "I'm sorry about your boyfriend," Marissa, who was seated beside me, said. She gently rested a hand on my shoulder. "I feel so bad for his family. I know that Tony wasn't perfect, but his family loved him," I admitted. "No mother deserves to bury a child." Craig, who was probably the closest to Tony, didn't say a word. He just kept driving without making a comment, which was fine by me. At that moment, I wanted to rail at him. Life was so short, and poor Tony was forced to date a girl that he wasn't into because his alpha male best friend ordered him to. "Did everyone get out?" Reg asked, his voice alone doing something to me. Hearing his voice was a source of comfort to me. I purposefully leaned against him to escape the anger, hurt, and unexpected grief that went through me. Tara and Yasmine were injured. "The thing that chased after Sophia clipped them on the way," Raph said. "Did you kill it?" "I don't think so. I used Sophia's shoes as a weapon. One of the shoes went right through his stomach. He disappeared after that, but he didn't come apart," Reg explained. "Awesome. I'll have to remember that tactic for next time," Raph said, seeming to be proud of his friend. "Hopefully it was in the group that we destroyed at Dwayne's house," Marissa said in an optimistic tone. "I'm going to drop you guys off, then pick up breakfast. Marissa, do you want to come with me? We should stick together so that Isaiah, Sophia, and I aren't surprised by those things," Craig pointed out. "Sure. I have a good memory. I can take everyone's order." I pulled open my clutch and cursed. My wallet was missing. Of course someone stole my wallet. Even in a crisis, a thief can't pass up an opportunity, I complained. "It's all right. Breakfast is on me," Craig insisted. "If you insist," Raph said, smirking, as if he had something sinister in mind. "Reginald, what do you want?" Marissa asked. "Chocolate chip pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream." "Sophia?" Marissa asked. "Bacon and eggs," I said, following Reg's lead. It seemed that everyone, including Raph, kept their orders as simple as they could. "This is a nice home," Marissa said, when Craig pulled into an opulent home. It looked to be 3 stories and had a gingerbread house-shaped roof, gray shingles, and a large and inviting freshly painted porch. Reg gently scooped me up in his arms and carried me into the house. Isaiah, who seemed a bit subdued, smirched when I wrapped my arms around his brother's neck. The gesture told me that he approved of me, which eased some of the hurt that Craig caused. "Feel free to make yourselves at home," Craig insisted, when he led us into a living room that had a fireplace. The talented one that held me carried me to a wing-back chair by the window and then sat with me on his lap. Isaiah, who was in the other winged-back chair, turned on the television and the news filled the screen. "Unexpected fire during a rock concert leads to dozens of injured people?" I read aloud. The TV was on mute. "Where did this happen?" Kent asked. "It looks like a small venue in Utah," I responded, eyeing the demolished building. "The sound on this TV doesn't work. Craig's father hasn't replaced it yet," Isaiah said. "It's too bad that awareness doesn't work with things on TV," lamented Raph, who sat alone on the couch. Although there was room on the couch, Kent sat on the hardwood floor directly in front of the fireplace, digging through a backpack on his lap. I knew that the normal thing to do was to join Raph on the couch. But being in Reg's arms was so comforting. I rested my face against his thundering heart, and it comforted me. He was alive, real, and could protect me. "Someone's coming," Kent hissed, getting to his feet, his stance stiffening. "It is just Dwayne," Raph said absently, as he pulled his phone from his jeans pocket and placed his earbuds in his ears. I gasped as I saw him tapping away on his phone. "I thought that awareness didn't work on technology," I said, watching as the blind guy flicked through the touchscreen. "It doesn't. Why do you ask?" Reg wondered. "He's using an iPhone," I reasoned. "He's using voiceover. Every iPhone comes with the software. The voice reads the screen, which means that someone without sight can navigate around and—" "You can text?" I exclaimed, excitement bubbling out of me. "Yes," Reggie said. "Good. What's your number?" I asked, as I fished around for my iPhone. Reg recited it to me, and it felt great to know that we could text when we parted ways. "What does Dwayne eat?" Raph asked. "Vegetarian food," Reg and I responded at the same time. "The girl?" Raph asked after tapping on his keyboard. "You can't go wrong with something simple like pancakes," Isaiah reasoned, when neither of us had an answer. "Why don't we just ask them?" Kent wondered. "Because they insist on staying in the foyer, and I don't feel like getting up. Do you feel like talking to them, Kent?" Raph challenged. "I'm all peopled out. I can't wait to go home. Maybe I can get my mother to bake me some peach cobbler." Kent's excitement lit up his face at the prospect. I couldn't help but be jealous that someone had that strong of a bond with their mother, but it gave me hope for all mothers everywhere. "After this, I'm gonna hit the gym and take a long nap," Raph said, as Dwayne entered the room, an exhausted Sherry at his side. She looked different when she was all cleaned up. Sherry had chocolate brown hair, hazel eyes, and what my mother would call flawless peaches and cream skin. One of the more exciting canvases to work on. She seemed subdued, but determined. "Hi, Sherry," I said from my position on Reg's lap. "Hi, Sophia. Thanks for saving my life," Sherry said before giving me a kiss on the cheek. "You are officially my new bestie. Who's the hottie?" she asked when she stepped back. "This is Reginald," I introduced. "He's the real hero. You literally jumped on the back of those trespassers, and you are human. You guys are so brave," Sherry commented, as she went around the room to hug everyone, even an uncomfortable Kent. "Sherry, why don't you sit down? I would hate it if you aggravated one of your wounds," Dwayne warned. "What wounds? Thanks to your special cream, they don't even itch," she said, as she caressed the scars that were running up and down her arms. "So, Sherry, why are you here?" Raph asked, as he patted the couch. The beauty plopped down beside him and gently took his hand. "I can make contact with the 8th talent of sight. My parents had just dropped me off at Dwayne's house when the trespassers attacked," Sherry said. "Trespassers?" Kent asked with confusion. "You know, the vampires, werewolves, fairies, and other creatures that want to step foot into our planet because they want to conquer new territories." "Hold up! Vampires, werewolves, fairies, they all exist?" I squeaked in horror. "Yes. They were meant to stay in their solar system, but for some reason, they want to come here. Us talented ones blocked them from doing so," she bragged. "But what sucks is we are the key to their astral forms becoming physical. Why would they want to be on Earth anyway? It's so overcrowded," I argued. "Each race has their own reasons, but they all try to enter the same way, through astral projection. If their souls are strong enough, they can become corporeal." "How many people like us are there?" Reg demanded, his voice filled with determination. Suddenly, Sherry groaned and clutched her head. "That hurt. Making contact with the talent always hurts after a while, she complained. Not as much as we'd like to hope. There are only 25 packs in the country, Dwayne chimed in for her. Packs? I asked. Yes. A group of talented is called a pack, Dwayne said as he sat down on the couch on the other side of Sherry. Marissa and a pale-faced Craig entered, their hands weighed down by takeout containers. Well, Kent said, aliens exist, Marissa. Just not the kind that we thought. Marissa grinned. Explain that after I eat, she pleaded. Dwayne, we ordered you a veggie burrito, Craig announced as he set his pile of boxes on the coffee table and then began opening the paper bag. Marissa placed her burden beside Craig's, and Craig began handing everyone what they ordered. Reg stood with me in his arms and made his way over to the fireplace. He placed me on the ground and sat across from me. Kent, who was all peopled out, rushed with his plate in hand over to the chair that we abandoned. After receiving our food and 2 bottles of orange juice, we dug in. Want some bacon? I asked with a smirk. Reg's eyes lit up at the prospect. I have a lot of strips here. Sure. Want a bite of my pancakes? He asked. Hell yeah, I exclaimed. He fed me a piece of his pancake with his fork, and I did the same. We ate in silence, periodically offering one another food. After breakfast was consumed by everyone, Dwayne spoke. I'm going to meet with the council. Behave, he ordered. Then he left, abandoning Sherry, who had recovered well. A nap sounds like a good idea. I'm out, Raph said, before speeding out of the room, followed by Kent, who didn't even bother saying goodbye. Reggie, my car is here. We can ride together, Isaiah offered. I'll give you a ride, Sophia.
Chapter 9. Reginald.
Shotgun!
Sherry shrieked as we walked toward the car. It was decided that Isaiah would drop her off at her house, which was down the street from our own. Sophia lumbered on beside me, her feet probably aching from the blisters that she had on them. The day had warmed up a bit, which was a relief.
So, Isaiah, what kind of car is this?
That was Sherry's first question when we all piled into the BMW. A BMW. My father won it on a game show a few years back and gave it to me after I got my license, he explained as I buckled my seatbelt. Sophia ended up using the seatbelt for the middle seat, and I scolded myself for being relieved that she was having skin-to-skin contact with me. Marissa chose to stay behind to guard Craig. That was just an excuse, and we all knew it. The quarterback was falling apart, and my friend wanted to help him in any way that she could. As soon as Isaiah took off, Sophia rested her head on my shoulder, and because I was an idiot, I wrapped my arm around her. She sighed in contentment, which both excited me and angered me. Had I been a blind man without any abilities, would she have been interested in me? I had no idea of that answer. I suppose that when she saw me at school and realized I wouldn't use any of my talents there, I would find out.
Anyone worried about the trespassers killing them in their sleep?
Sophia asked.
Trespassers can only take energy from someone that's awake,
Sherry informed us.
That's why they don't just snatch people from their beds.
Well, I can sleep at night, now that I know sleeping is my only defense, Sophia said. Would they kill a human that they weren't trying to suck dry? I asked, wondering if Sophia would have been safer in bed.
Reg, I'm glad you woke me up.
I saved you, remember? Sophia reminded me as she pressed even closer to me. Where did you get that pocket knife? I wondered.
When I went to the bathroom last night, I found it in one of the drawers, she explained.
You were snooping? Isaiah asked, shocked.
Yeah, so? I wasn't taking my chances with Dwayne. I figured that if he tried to drag me off in my sleep, I'd have a weapon against him, she reasoned, which made my arm tighten a bit.
I wouldn't have let him kill you, I assured Sophia, who chuckled.
Of course, Reg, but I still needed backup in case he struck while you were, in the shower or something.
Thanks for distracting that trespasser, I said, feeling grateful that she acted in the face of terror. The next time you encounter one of them, sleep or hide.
And thank you for saving me,
she told me. It was obvious that she was currently thinking of Tony Jerkins and what his fate had been.
It's okay, Sophia. There was nothing any of us could have done about Tony Jerkins,
Sherry piped up.
There were so many trespassers that even my eyesight came back, and I was 20 miles from you at the time in some motel because that was all my parents could find last minute.
Her words were logical, and she did have a point. I was no superhero with an endless amount of power, and neither were my friends. There was only so much that we could do to protect those people. But the simple fact that I hadn't been fast enough bothered me so much that for the rest of the drive, I didn't speak much at all.
Well, this is me,
Sophia said when Isaiah's car stopped moving. I made contact with awareness, echo, and velocity, and opened the door and was on Sophia's side of the car before the girl could even unbuckle her seatbelt. When she opened her door and stepped onto the gravel with nothing but socks protecting her feet, she let out a breath. I'll carry you, I told her, before scooping her up in my arms and walking over to the porch. My ears picked up sounds of snoring and some Spanish music softly playing in the background.
What if my grandmother is awake?
Sophia softly asked, which made things perfectly clear to me. She was embarrassed to introduce me to her family, the way that Yasmine had been.
Why are you giving me a death glare when I have a point? If you walk into my house without a cane, it will confuse her when you aren't using your abilities, unless you want to pretend that you have sight. It doesn't matter either way.
You want to see me again? I asked skeptically.
You don't want to see me again?
Sophia asked, the hurt in her tone making me feel like I was a big idiot. Yes, Sophia, I want to see you again, I assured her, without explaining why I had initially responded so poorly. I wasn't an expert at women, but instincts told me that I shouldn't tell her about how Yasmine was overly cautious about introducing me to her parents.
Oh, I get it. You're just mad that you have to say goodbye to me,
she teased.
It's okay, Reg. I'll text you.
Come on. We need to go before your grandmother wakes up, I insisted, before scooping her into my arms and rushing at super speed to the porch and opening the unlocked door and rushing into the house.
Bye, Reg,
she said as soon as I placed her on her feet in what was probably her living room. Take care, Sophia, I said, before wrapping her in a hug to ease the ache that was starting to form in my chest. She held me tightly before releasing me and placing a kiss on my cheek that nearly made me lose my common sense and press her against the wall and kiss her. But instead, I forced a smile and left her behind.
Goodness, Reggie,
Sherry said as soon as I got into Isaiah's back seat.
Why didn't you ask her out? That girl is so into you.
Reggie doesn't date, Isaiah responded with a chuckle.
Well, you should. If not, the council will pair you with a worthy human, and believe me, you don't want that,
Sherry said, which made both Isaiah and I shout. What?
You don't know? Our species is becoming extinct, so the council implemented the reproduction program. When a talented turns 19, they will either declare who they want to marry, or will have a partner chosen for them.
What if they're gay? Isaiah asked, his curiosity getting to him.
Then the gay talented one will have to choose from the catalog of viable sperm donors and surrogates, she reasoned. But the talented has to be married to someone because the 6th and 7th talents won't be unlocked without a binding union.
What about Craig and Marissa? If Dwayne figures out that she doesn't have an attachment to him, he'll be killed, Isaiah said, obviously worrying about his obnoxious friend.
Once Craig is proven to be in good health, he will be offered an ultimatum. Be someone's husband or die,
Sherry responded. Goodness, 19? Why so young? I asked, surprised by the age choice.
Because the talented usually don't live long lives, Reggie, she responded solemnly.
How does my father not know about me being a talented? I challenged.
Because you and your friends come from a new bloodline, which is cool. A new bloodline hasn't popped up in a century.
So, my kid could be talented? Isaiah asked, sounding devastated.
Yes, and the reproduction program isn't just for the talented, but the half-breeds as well.
So, when I'm 19, I'll have to get married? Isaiah said, sounding shocked.
Yes, and Dwayne will visit all your parents and compensate you for all the trespassers you kill. The visage, an ancient artifact, can tell.
How much money do I get per kill? I asked, brightening.
10,000 per death, 5,000 for an assist.
But I've killed hundreds of them, I said in shock. That has to be at least 10 grand for me, Isaiah cheered.
Well, Dwayne will have to get someone from the council to compensate you for your good work.
After that last statement, Isaiah pulled up in front of Sherry's house, and she shouted a goodbye before running into her house. After Isaiah and I arrived at an empty house, the first thing I did was take a shower. Then I tucked myself into my queen-sized bed and quickly fell asleep. My dreamless sleep was interrupted by a shaking of my shoulders. My eyes opened, and I was relieved to have no sight. What? I asked, confused. I just got an interesting delivery, Isaiah reported, his voice sounding horrified.
What was it?
I asked through a yawn. A few guns, a case with some bottles, and 2 crates of ammunition, he responded, which made my eyes widen. With a note that simply said, "From the council, thanks for your service. Good thing Grandpa took you to the gun range a lot." Why didn't the sword I got have a note? I wondered. Don't know. It's a good thing that the committee member was smart enough to put the weapons in my room. Oh, and Mom is downstairs. She's pissed that we blew off Dad. So, I have to talk to her? I asked. No, she doesn't want to deal with either of us right now. She also knows that you snuck out. Not only are you grounded, she wants to take your phone. Fine. Once I get my money, I'll just ask Kent to open a line for me and I'll just pay my own bill, I figured. Are you all right, Isaiah? Key, Isaiah said. You blame Craig and Yasmine for that. Isaiah knew me too well. If Craig hadn't stolen Key's cello and dumped it in the middle of the field, he never would have gone after it, I reasoned. And me? Isaiah asked. You blame me as well? No, but you still chose to bring that idiot around the house after the crap with Yasmine went down. Craig used to be your friend, Reggie, Isaiah reminded me. Don't mention that crap, I said. To think that I used to prefer his company over everyone else was disgusting. Key told you not to go camping, Isaiah guessed. And I told him that everything would be fine. I was wrong.
Chapter 10. Sophia. Me. So, Reg, what are you wearing tomorrow? Reg. Clothes. Me. To honor Tony, everyone is wearing school colors. Reg. Red and blue? Me. Yep. Reg. Blue jeans and my school sweatshirt, I guess. You? Me. Nothing, because I don't want to go. Reg. Why not? Me. Because everyone will stare at me and shoot me pitying looks. Reg. So? Me. So? So? Really? Reg. Really? Me. Hello? What if people know that Tony got paid to date me? Reg. Then they know. Me. I miss you. Reg. Oddly enough, I miss you too. Me. You ruined it by adding oddly enough. Reg. It's weird to miss you. I just met you. Me. No, it's weird to be attacked by trespassers. Reg. You mean aliens? Sophia, come down here, my father shouted, which made me curse. I had truly been enjoying the texting game, but it was time to visit Tony's family and pay my respects. Slipping the phone into my black purse, I stood from the edge of my bed and glanced in the mirror to hope that I got the look well. A casual gray sweater, black jeans, and flats were what Mom suggested. Dad must have told her about Tony, because the first thing she texted was, "Baby, sorry about Tony. Make sure when you see him to wear subdued colors. I'll Skype in a few days." Me. Got to go. TTYL. If I was being honest with myself, I really didn't want to visit Tony Jerkin's family. In fact, I hardly wanted to stay awake, let alone attempt to figure out what I was going to say to his mother. Was he called an ex-boyfriend even if he was hired? What would that be called? A boyfriend for hire? His title didn't matter now, since the trespassers had killed him. And the worst part was that I felt terribly for the family. But Tony? It was difficult to get past the feelings of anger and betrayal to grieve him. And what made things awkward was that I hadn't liked him too much as a person for quite some time. The desire to be rid of him was strong. So it wasn't like I was going to pine for a lost love. The thought was so exhausting that I closed my eyes, the prospect of sleep making my body grow heavy. "Sophia, let's go." My father's words made me get out of bed and shuffle into the bathroom to dab on some makeup. I ran downstairs to meet my father in the kitchen. The smell of spicy food filled my nose, but my stomach didn't react to the delectable scent. My grandma, a short, plump woman in her early 50s with thick, curly black hair and eyes that screamed "friend," turned from the sink to face me. Without a word, she wrapped me in a tight hug and gave me a soft kiss on the cheek. I squeezed back, hoping that she never got caught up with the trespassers. "Sophia, I'm so glad you're awake," she said when she pulled away from me. "How are you feeling?" "Tired and cold," I yawned. "When you get back, I'll make you some soup," she promised, as I turned to follow my father, who was carrying a pan wrapped in foil out of the house. My father drove a Chevy SUV, and the seats were comfortable. I blazed the heat, closing my eyes as my bones felt as though they were thawing out. Dad winced and rolled down the window. The day was sunny, and several people walked around without jackets, so maybe this amount of heat wasn't necessary, but I didn't care. "Your grandmother made chicken and cheese enchiladas," Dad said, his eyes cutting to me every time he hit a red light. I glanced down at the warm pan that rested on my lap and grinned. That was nice of her. I hope Angel eats it. That's all my father and I spoke about before we pulled into the driveway of the 3 family that Tony's family lived in. His father, Wade, and his mother, Erica, were landlords who rented out the top floors of the house. We left the car, my father taking the pan from me. I shuddered, hating the absence of the heat, but figured that if I walked quicker, I'd be cocooned in warmth. Bones aching, I climbed the cement steps, and after opening the storm door, rang the bell. Angel, Tony's younger sister, opened the door, her sorrow-filled eyes meeting mine. "Hi," she said, eyeing my father, who stood right behind me. "Hi, Angel," I responded. She led us into the house. A few cousins and her parents were huddled on the couch. The apartment was empty. It felt that way, mostly because everyone in the living room was silent. Angel carried the enchiladas into the kitchen as I stood in front of the couple. It caught me by surprise when his mother, Erica, a portly woman with a bad weave and red-rimmed eyes, stared at me. She didn't say a word, which was uncomfortable.
Marcos, thanks for coming.
His father, a robust man with a goatee, finally said.
Hi, Wade. I came to see how you were doing,
my father said. He took a seat next to Erica on the couch. Since the other couch and 2 recliners were full, I had no other course of action to take than to step away and lean against the wall, hoping that people took my silence as grief.
So, Marcos, how's the new school?
Wade asked, forcing friendliness in his tone.
It's going well, my father began. Some of the soccer players have had scouts come out looking for them already.
My father taught at a high school a town over, which was a relief, because running into my father at school would have just been awkward. Sophia, can I talk to you for a moment? Angel asked, which made my heart pound. What if she asked me what happened to her brother? His body was destroyed by the blast. All that were left were bones and a skull. The fire apparently hadn't taken out the entire house, just the bedroom and a bathroom. Sure, I said. She led me through the kitchen, which was filled with flowers, teddy bears, and cards, up the narrow staircase and into her messy room. As soon as the door closed, she eyed me with hate in her eyes. So, where were you? She began, her hands on her hips. Where was I asked, confused. Angel Jerkins and I were cordial, but never really hung out because we were 2 grades apart. She was a beauty, though, with her beautiful brown eyes and small, straight nose, not to mention her hourglass shape and big boobs. Why did you leave my brother to die? She challenged. Crap. I hadn't prepared a reason for not being there with a crowd that had escaped. Well, Tony and I broke up, I lied. I pretty much left after Tony admitted that he was in love with Claudia. She didn't need to know about what Craig had done. I wasn't sure that Tony loved Claudia, but hey, the man was dead. It wasn't like he could argue. So, you weren't there when the fire started? No, Angel. I am so sorry for what happened to Tony. If I was able to, I would have saved him, I said, a yawn actually breaking through my words. Surprise flitted across Angel's face for a moment before her shoulders sagged. Figured. Beth said that she hadn't seen you in the crowd when the fire started. And now I get why you didn't come by sooner, Angel said, her shoulders sagging. Poor thing. She had probably wanted to hold me accountable because she had to blame someone for what happened. It was too bad that she would never know who the murderers were. Do you mind if I have some time alone, Sophia? Angel suddenly asked. Sure, I said. But as I took a step, my abdomen exploded in white-hot pain. I doubled over, a groan flying from my lips. Sophia? Angel asked, her worried voice spurring me on to stand up straight. Wow, that hurt, I complained as the pain began to dull. Do you have appendicitis or something? You look sick, Angel commented as she gently steered me to the door. I don't know, I said, wanting to roll my eyes. The girl was self-centered if she wanted to kick me out after that. Well, screw her. After she slammed the door behind me, I limped down the stairs, wincing at the pain. Then I went into the living room, my eyes landing on my father, who was laughing with Wade Jerkins. His poor wife was sitting there, her eyes condemning whoever they landed on. My father eyed me, his worried eyes widened.
Sophia, are you all right?
My dad asked. Yes, I rasped. wanting to curl up and sleep. But I stood against the wall while my father reminisced with people he had known as a boy. Erica had babysat my father when she was a teenager. The once quiet audience joined in. My father bringing joy to this dreary home. It warmed my heart when the quiet Erica told a story of her own. After a while, my father had to excuse himself so that he could grade papers. That was music to my weary ears.
"Sophia, how's Angel?"
my father asked as soon as we got into the car. "Looking for someone to blame," I muttered, longing to text Reg to tell him what happened.
"Of course she is. She probably wants to hate someone right now. Since Tony was your boyfriend and he took you to the party, you were an easy target. Speaking of which, what were you thinking, Sophia?"
"About what?" I asked as I leaned my head against the headrest.
"Going up to that cabin with alcohol and boys?" he asked.
Here we go. The lecture and punishment. My father had probably wanted to yell at me when he arrived home sometime last night, but I had slept all of Saturday and part of Sunday away. I didn't know about the party being at the cabin. I had just assumed that it would be at Craig's house. Tony didn't really give me details when he invited me. As for the liquor, I didn't know of any. I guess after I left, the party really got poppin'.
"Why didn't you stay there?"
my father quizzed, his facial expression telling me he was thinking about my punishment. Tony and I broke up.
"So you didn't leave as soon as you saw that the party was in the middle of nowhere?"
"No," I answered.
"You are grounded for a week, but you can keep your phone. And your curfew has been reduced to 8 on school nights and 7 on weekends. If you behave, I'll change my mind," he said.
At that point, I was too exhausted to care.
"Fine," I said, yawning.
My father pulled into the driveway, and I stumbled when I exited the car. After entering the house, I kissed my grandmother and lumbered over to the couch, where I curled up and immediately fell asleep.
Chapter 11. Reginald. It was difficult to drag myself out of bed and go to school on Monday, but I forced myself to do it. Mom was still upset at both Isaiah and me, and punished my brother by taking his car keys. When I rushed down the stairs and was about to open the door, I felt a yank on my hoodie. I halted, and the grip released. "Wait," my mother hissed. I spun around, considering if making contact with an ability would be worth it. "Hi, Mom," I greeted, wishing that her disappointment would end. For goodness sakes, there were a lot more important things than seeing my dad, like defending people against aliens that wanted to trespass on our world. It was agitating that me, being a part of a new bloodline, didn't have a parent who was familiar with the war. "Give me your phone, Reggie," she ordered. Of course. Isaiah had warned me that this was coming, and I cursed. What if the others texted me about trespassers and my mom saw it? My hesitation only made her impatient. Before I could make sure that the iPhone was locked, she dug into the front pocket of my hoodie and pulled it out. That pissed me off, because, really? She couldn't wait the whole 10 seconds it would have taken for me to hand her the phone? That wasn't necessary, I snapped, my voice sharp. "You watch your tone, and yes, it was. Your father pays for your phone bill, and if you can't respect him, you shouldn't receive the privileges that he offers you," she lectured. "Why do you want me to see him so badly? Why do you care?" My frustrated words made my mother take a deep breath before responding. "Because he is your father," Mom said, her voice stern. "He loves you and wants to be a part of your life. It hurts him every time you refuse to see him. Why do you hate him?" "Mom, it's complicated," Isaiah said from his place at the kitchen table.
What do you mean, it's complicated?
The woman demanded, her voice stern. At the moment, worry and fear slipped in at the thought of my mother knowing what destiny each of our descendants would have. It hit me just then that my children, my children's children, and so on, would fight trespassers, and the bleakness of that made my shoulders sag. It would kill my mother when she received news that any child she bore would either be like me or Isaiah. Without hesitation, I drew her in for a hug, which she accepted. After releasing me, she huffed.
You are going to Maine to see your father this weekend, she ordered.
He can't, Isaiah protested. You took my car away.
I'm going to drag the both of you up there myself.
Mom, I can't, I said, having the terrible feeling that she wasn't going to drop it. I had to talk to my friends about this dilemma.
You can and you will. Now, go to school,
my mother said as the doorbell rang. Who is that? Isaiah wondered. Before I could touch awareness, the door swung open and footsteps raced into the kitchen. Moments later, a pair of thin arms wrapped around my waist, and a warm face was resting against my chest. The vanilla scent, along with the way my heart rate sped up, told me that it was Sophia in my arms. I ran my fingers through her straightened hair, enjoying the silky texture.
That feels nice,
Sophia commented through a yawn.
Reggie, who is she?
My mother snapped, sounding irritated. Sophia quickly pulled away and turned so that her back was to me.
I'm Sophia Sanchez. Sorry for not knocking. I just figured that it would be okay to come in. The door was unlocked,
she said, her voice filled with exuberance.
How do you know my son?
My mother asked, sounding suspicious.
We go to school together. Reg and I are...
Reg? My mother asked, surprised.
He answers to that? Yes,
Sophia said with a chuckle.
Oh, why do you have Reggie's hoodie?
My mother wondered.
Because he gave it to me when I was cold, and, well, it was the only thing red in my wardrobe that wasn't a mini dress, so I figured, what the hell? Reggie gave you his hoodie because you were cold?
My mother repeated, as if the thought of me being nice to anyone was surprising.
Yes. So, Sophia, are you friends with Raph, Kent, and Marissa? Yes, they are part of the study group we have, along with Craig and Isaiah. Craig and Reggie are friends again?
My mother asked, her stunned voice making me take action. I had been so distracted by Sophia's presence that I hadn't concluded that she was here for a reason. Sophia, how did you get here? I asked, curious.
My car. Why?
She asked, curious.
Did Isaiah text you?
My mother wondered.
No. In fact, none of your sons answered my text, which is why I'm here,
Sophia squeaked.
My sons are both grounded,
my mother said at the same time I spoke. You have Isaiah's number? I hissed.
Of course. Kent sent it to me along with everyone else,
she said.
Why can't your brother have Sophia's number?
My mother challenged. Never mind that. We're going to be late for school, I reminded my mother.
Fine, but Sophia and the rest of your study group are invited over for dinner on Wednesday night. I'm making tacos,
Mom said, which made me stiffen. There was a reason why we only met as a group at Marissa's house. Ever since Marissa's older sister Kelly had been abducted and killed 10 years ago, her mother made sure that she always knew where Marissa stayed and who she was with. Marissa's parents are pretty strict, Mom, I protested.
Fine, I'll invite them as well,
she insisted. Mom, I'm grounded, I protested.
From your phone. And besides, I want to finally meet your friends. You always refuse to invite them over.
Fine, I grumbled.
Reggie, you didn't eat breakfast. There's oatmeal on the stove,
my mother announced, which made my face scrunch up. I hated oatmeal.
I made Reg an egg and cheese sandwich, Sophia announced. How thoughtful, my mother said. Now, go to school, kids. I would hate for all of you to be late.
Without making contact with my abilities, I unfolded the cane that had been resting in one of the kitchen chairs and made my way outside. It was chilly, the smell of fresh rain in the air, telling me that I was in danger of stepping on a puddle.
I parked in front of your house,
Sophia said as she continued to walk in front of me. Isaiah trailed behind me, his silence telling me that he was probably unsure of himself.
Isaiah, can you get into the car? I need to talk to Reg for a moment.
Sure, Isaiah said before climbing into the car. Sophia shoved me until my back collided with her car. Then she poked a finger into my chest.
So, want to explain why you didn't text me?
My phone got taken away, I said, my irritation building. Couldn't she confront me when my mother didn't have a view of us?
And when did your precious phone get taken away?
She challenged. This morning, I said hesitantly.
So, you ignored me last night, she challenged.
To be honest, I didn't check my phone. I was too busy dealing with Isaiah and the fact that a random source delivered cases of weapons to him. We were trying to debate where we should hide the weapons. Sorry I didn't text you. It isn't like you're my number one priority, Sophia. My words caused her to back away. She stomped her foot, then headed to the driver's seat without even saying another word. Crap. I screwed up. She had wanted to speak to me about something, or was most likely in trouble, and probably wasn't going to tell me because of what I said. I sighed and opened the passenger door, figuring that my words, though said with the mind of someone that was frustrated with something else, may have solved my problem. Though it hurt to admit it, Sophia was suffering from hero worship. As soon as I entered the car, the thing that I noted was the lemon scent from what had to be a car freshener and the unbearable heat. Before I could say anything, Sophia placed a bag on my lap. You really made me the sandwich? I asked in surprise. I had figured that she was rescuing me from the oatmeal. But she didn't speak to me. She just gasped it as if a horde of trespassers were chasing her. The trespassers aren't here, I said to Sophia. And just like that, she slowed down. Eat, she ordered, and guilt momentarily filled my gut. But I knew that a week from now, I'd be yesterday's news. I debated refusing to eat, but then figured that I should. I reached in and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. She had made the sandwich on an English muffin and had also packed me a cinnamon roll. Thanks, I said, worried about what she'd say back. But she didn't respond. She pulled into Sherry's driveway and exited the car without a word as I struggled to eat the breakfast. You made Sophia cry, Isaiah hissed. Apologize. No, I didn't, I said, protesting mainly because I hoped that it wasn't true. While you were standing out there, she was sniffling. Man, she's hot. Don't mess this up for yourself. If she's so hot, why don't you date her? I argued, annoyed that Isaiah always offered pointers when I didn't need them. Nah, she isn't my type, but she is into you. Don't worry, Isaiah. You'll have a chance with her after she's bored with me. Does it matter why you're getting played? At least you are, he reasoned, as Sophia plopped into the seat.
I am not a morning person,
Sherry whined as she sat in the back with Isaiah.
Even with 4 cups of coffee, I feel like I am not alert. No one talked to me.
So, Sophia began as she continued driving.
What kind of play are you getting?
None, I responded, my confusion evident.
Never mind. It isn't like we're friends anyway. I shouldn't forget, she said.
So now that we're going back to school, I'm nothing? I shouted, angry that the hero worship had worn off that quickly.
You're the one that was so stinking rude when I came to check on you. Why didn't you answer? I thought the trespassers ate you, she fired back. And then you just... Ugh, why do I bother? Because you're fascinated by my abilities. Don't worry, you'll get bored and date someone like Isaiah. It's how girls like you are. Girls like me? What does that mean? Sophia snapped. Sophia, think. If I hadn't saved your life, would you have given me the time of day? That could go both ways. It isn't like you are super social, she fired back. Think about this, Sophia. Why didn't you become friends with Marissa when you first came here? Because you're like everyone else, interested in having a ton of popular friends, I said insultingly. Sophia took in a deep breath and then sighed dramatically. Fine. I got it. I thought that you wanted to be around me, but you don't. So the next time I see you, I won't say a word to you. I didn't know that I was annoying you that much. No, I think that you're a bit misguided, but not annoying. Sophia, Misguided? Sophia asked hotly. Sophia, I like you. I really do. But just face it, a girl like you will never stay interested in a guy like me. Crap. As soon as I said those words, I grew so embarrassed that I was silent for the rest of the ride.
Chapter 12. Sophia. Sophia, I like you. I really do. But just face it. A girl like you will never stay interested in a guy like me. Those words, said with so much pain, sliced my heart into pieces. I knew that Mr. Broody Pants believed them. He didn't so much as sigh as I parked in the lot. Isaiah and Sherry were quick to exit. But when Reg tried to open the door, I child-locked it. No way was he leaving me now after admitting that he liked me. Sophia, let me go, Reg said, his voice stern. What do you mean by a girl like me? I asked, hoping he meant an incredibly awesome girl. Beautiful, he simply said. How do you know I'm beautiful if you haven't seen me? When the trespassers come along, my vision is restored. I saw you. Your eyes are the most. Sophia, we are going to be late. My eyes are what? Oh, hell no. You can't just start to give me a compliment and then just end it, I protested. I'm sorry, was all Reg said before I sighed and flipped the child lock. We exited the car, and I felt cold, even with Reg's hoodie on. Which reminded me, I hadn't asked him if the trespasser attempting to kill me had side effects. Sophia, a voice called. I craned my neck to see Ashley, the head cheerleader waving at me from her Beamer. I waved back, and she eyed Reg and mouthed, "What the hell are you doing?" But I didn't respond. Instead, I smirked, and then grabbed Reg's warm hand and he shuddered, probably at the grip of my hand. We walked into the building so that we could go to our lockers. Westgrove High was gargantuan compared to my last school. 2,000 students walked the halls, and each hallway was painted a different color. Because of this, some trash talkers from other schools called us the Tacky Rainbow School. We walked down the network of hallways that were sky blue, complete with lockers painted the same color. When it started, the staring. People shot me pitying glances as they loitered at their lockers, dressed in red and blue. Some people that knew me offered weak waves or said hello. A few people even told me that they were sorry for my loss. But in the end, all the sincere words made me glad that I hadn't bothered parking on the field. Do you need to put anything in your locker? I wondered. I don't have a locker. I just store everything in my TVI's office, he responded. TVI? Teacher of the visually impaired. She also has a paraprofessional working with her to braille the materials that we need, Rich explained. Oh, where is that? I asked. In the side room of the library, Reg responded. The library was in the opposite direction of the door leading to the football field. Here, use my locker, I offered as we came to a stop. After working the combination, I opened my locker and sucked in a breath. There was an envelope resting atop my history book. Is something wrong? Reg asked. There's an envelope in my locker, I noted. You don't think that the trespassers would, put poisonous powder in the mail? No, Reg said. The trespassers aren't hunters. They will pretty much attack only prey of opportunity. Well, hell, let's just see what this says, I said, figuring that there was no time like the present. Just whisper the words. I'll make contact with Echo, Reg offered. That was fortunate, since some people were starting to walk past us. I opened the envelope and pulled out the letter. Dear Sophia Sanchez, I hope this letter finds you well. Dwayne Parker has met with the council to discuss your future. According to the Keeper, you protected one of our own in a battle with the trespassers. Because of your bravery, we think you would make a good candidate for one of the talented, or a half-breed. To determine if your bloodline is an appropriate one to mate with, we hope that you will be willing to undergo a physical at our headquarters. Also, Eldrin, the accountant, will meet with you to determine how much you need to be paid for assisting our talented ones. He will be by tonight to start the education of the Westgrove pack. May you stay safe. The Council. So, I'm good breeding stock? I squeaked, disbelieving of what the letter said. At least they won't kill you, Reg pointed out, his voice filling with relief. What if I don't pass the physical? What then? My voice squeaked as it grew louder. What if they kill me? What if I'm barren? Sophia, Reg said, his voice gentle. He rested a hand on my shoulder and the heat of his palm chasing away the chill. Let's go to the memorial first. We need to pay our respects for the fallen. Then we'll try to figure out what's going on, Reg decided. Okay, I said, knowing that he was right. I snatched his backpack and along with mine, shoved them into my locker and locked it. Then he took my hand and we made it to the field. Over here, Marissa, who had to be using one of her talents, called. Our little group was sitting toward the middle of the crowd. It was freezing out. Or maybe it was the cold that I was suffering from. Isaiah, Sherry, Marissa, Kent, and Raph were all sitting in this row. They slid down so that Reggie and I could sit. Even when we were well into the ceremony, I still held his hand. I needed him. Tony Jerkins was my best friend, Craig began, his face filled with sorrow. He was the kind of guy that would do anything for a friend. He would always put himself before others. He loved his family, his school, football, and his friends. But I'm sure all of you knew that. But what you didn't know is that Tony volunteered at a children's hospital and would entertain sick children. Craig, who was obviously in pain, stopped speaking for a moment, most likely to gather himself. His words made me finally feel the grief without feeling the hurt and the betrayal. Now I sat there on the bleachers, surrounded by students, finally able to appreciate the loss of someone that I had considered a friend. Tears began falling down my cheeks, the grief needing an exit. It was like if I cried enough, the emotions would escape with the liquid currently springing from my eyes. Tony also volunteered for Little League. His dream was to become a gym teacher and hopefully coach a football team. I'm so sorry that Tony is gone. I wish that I could have saved him. I wish that I'd never thrown that stupid party. But I did. And my best friend is gone. I guess all I have to do now is live with my choices. Craig exited the stage, quickly running toward the locker room. Thankfully, Mr. Summers, the football coach, ran after him. Our principal, Mr. Cofield, a gray-haired man who was thick everywhere, spoke. Tony Jerkins was one of our own, and he will be missed. But he left a legacy behind. He loved life and cared for others. I don't want any of you to forget that. He paused for a moment before speaking again. There will be grief counselors available all day today. Feel free to speak to someone. You may go to your second period classes. Everyone stood, except for me. I was still bawling hysterically, which was stupid. I hadn't even loved Tony, although I had been there when he died because he was unlucky. Sophia? Reg called as the sobs kept on racking my body. He gathered me in his arms, and I knew that Reg was about to break the rules and engage one of his abilities, but I had no energy to stop him. The tears just kept on coming. He moved down the stairs and kept on walking. People were probably so focused on themselves that they didn't notice that a blind man was carrying a woman and traveling without the use of his cane. He continued to walk, and I clung to him, unable to fathom being parted from him. Reg was wrong. These feelings that I had for him had nothing to do with hero worship, and more to do with the fact that I wasn't complete without him. It had only been a few days since we met, and I knew that ignoring him in the halls would never be an option. When I realized that, a sharp pain nearly slit my stomach in half. My tears turned into an anguished shriek. Reg, it hurts. More tears fell as the ache in my stomach increased. I'm going to die. Kent, something's wrong with Sophia, Reg shouted, panic in his tone. And then his speed increased, which made things 10 times worse. His strides were drawing my body. I thought that I'd blacked out. Hold on, Sophia, we're almost at Kent's house. Sophia, where does it hurt? Reg asked. I was being lowered to a surface, but I wouldn't let go of him because I was really scared. Sophia, let Reggie put you down, Sherry pleaded. For some reason, knowing that Sherry was here made me relax. I was placed on what had to be a table and groaned as someone lifted up my shirt. Isaiah, what do you see? Sherry demanded. Is her skin red, like she was burned? Yes, Isaiah said. Sherry, how is that possible? Reg demanded, as something cold was placed on my stomach. Stop, I'm cold, I complained, reaching for what had to be an ice pack. Someone, not Reg, held my hands over my head. For the record, I'm not using that ice pack again, Kent declared. Sophia, are you cold? Sherry asked, interested. Yes, now take this stupid ice pack off my skin, I shouted, wondering why someone hadn't broke down the door by now. Have you been tired? She asked. So sleepy, I complained. How do you feel about Reg? Sherry wondered. Is he the one holding the ice pack to my skin? I snapped. No. Reg, all you can do is hold the ice pack to her stomach. The symptoms will pass, Sherry reported. What's happening, Sherry? Just tell us. Reg pleaded as I continued to shudder. Dwayne told me not to say anything until Eldrin got here. I promised. Sherry, you need to help Sophia, Marissa pleaded as the chill began to spread all over my body. Knowing the truth won't make a difference, the terrified girl who could touch knowledge responded. Please, just give me a blanket, I begged, my teeth chattering. Fine, but you have got to promise not to rat me out. Dwayne will be angry,
And I hate making people angry, Sherry said, her voice filled with pleading that I, for one, didn't understand. For goodness sake, she was the one with the power. What could Dwayne, a half-breed, do to her? Reg, no physical is needed. Sophia is compatible with the talented. The end. This has been Talented, written by Debbie Civil, narrated by Adam Gold and Lauren Rodriguez. Copyright 2018 by Debbie Civil. Production copyright by Debbie Civil.